Chapter 495. Whirlwind Slash. Another curved sword appeared in Soren's palm, and in an instant, it rolled up a storm-like attack. The so-called Great Whirlwind was an astonishing speed of at least 10 slashes per second. This kind of extreme speed would not affect the strength and accuracy of the attacks too much. In the case of a perfect dual-wielding weapon, this kind of attack speed could be doubled. Soren could not do it in his usual state. Only by relying on the effect of greater haste could he barely reach the standard. After assassinating the oldest native shaman in an instant, Soren quickly cleaned up the warriors next to him and rushed to another shaman wearing a mask. These guys were dressed a bit like enchanters, and they had an aura that Soren did not like. It was a very chaotic power. Corpses fell one by one. Near the altar, some kind of terrible power was also rapidly condensing, and then countless blood flowed like a flowing river and gathered near the stone of the altar. Not only the blood of the first sacrifice, but also the blood of the targets killed by Soren. The Aborigines woke up from a dream and picked up their weapons. But at this time the elite pirates had already rushed in. One by one the strong half-elf archers stepped on the roof, and then shot arrows at the enemies in front of them. Occupy the high ground. Longbowmen suppress the target. Pay attention to the spellcasters nearby. These half-elf longbowmen were not warriors but professional archers. They had mastered a small number of ranger skills, but there was little close combat training. As a mixed-blood intelligent creature with a part of elven blood, the half-elves knew very well how to play to their advantage. As long as their talent was good and the proportion of elven blood was high, they would receive archer training and choose targets with the ability to advance to a profession. There were not many archers, but the combat effect was obvious. Because their shooting speed was quite fast, and one of the older half-elves was more steady. He could actually hold 6 arrows in one hand. Although he could not do the magical shooting skill of multiple arrows, he could save the process of pulling out the arrows from behind. He actually shot 7 or 8 arrows in 2 seconds. In front of his eyes, the indigenous warriors fell one after another. This kind of extraordinary skill was no longer something that could be achieved through ordinary training. It required one's own talent to keep up. Even with a mortal's elemental foundation, he was able to surpass Soren's explosive power in archery. The explosive power of this group of archers was quite amazing. More than 2/3 of them pulled out 3 arrows from their backs at the same time, which meant that they all had the ability, continuous shooting. If it wasn't for the fact that magic archers required a high amount of talent and a certain amount of spellcasting ability, they would be worth a lot of money to nurture. There were no more Aborigines standing in front of Soren. When the blood gathered on the altar, the nearby Aborigines seemed to have seen something terrifying and retreated one after another. They were actually afraid of the god they served. The thick blood gradually condensed into a distorted monster with an indescribable appearance. It looked a bit like a sludge monster, but there was a vague human silhouette in the middle. Blood cocoon? The monster in front of him made Soren stunned for a moment. He seemed to have seen something similar in the bottomless abyss, but it was not so terrible. It seemed to be the offspring of a demon lord that looked like a cocoon. The familiar fluctuations of the gods emerged. Soren could be sure that the distorted monster in front of him was its incarnation, but it was the first time he had encountered an enemy in this form. Shadow strike. Sword form, horizontal slash. Soren's figure disappeared in place. With the afterimage left by the high-speed movement, the curved sword Icing Death hit the target in an instant. There was no dodge. The monster in front of him just stood there and let Soren attack. There was a strange cold light on Icing Death. It was like cutting through jelly. There was no resistance point at all, and it easily penetrated the opponent's body. But in the next moment, the blood that had become like jelly pudding surged up and turned into strange tentacles that stabbed into Soren's body. Physical immunity? Soren's figure retreated quickly, and his face suddenly became serious. Just now he had cut a more than 3 meters long sword mark, but the opponent did not feel the slightest bit of pain, and the wound healed easily. Soren's damage to it was probably very low. He only relied on the power of shadow erosion and the cold energy of Icing Death to hurt it a little. But judging from the shape of the enemy, its regeneration ability was also quite amazing, because its body had been absorbing the blood nearby. What the hell is this? Soren jumped up suddenly. Blood flowed under his feet and then rolled over like a curtain. It was very corrosive. A corrosive effect that was only effective on flesh and blood creatures. The corpse in front of him was completely corroded by the blood, but the soil and rocks were not affected at all. Soren swung his sword again. This time he broke out with all his strength and directly cut off the semi-solid state of blood. But the strange thing happened again. These cut bodies automatically moved towards the main body and then merged again. It's really like some ooze monsters. Soren had almost figured out the characteristics of the enemy after 2 probing attacks. He murmured, "So, physical attacks really don't have much effect on it? Law, intimidate. Ineffective." As more and more flesh and blood were corroded, the body of the distorted monster became bigger and bigger. Suddenly its body began to change. Hands, feet, and head stretched out from the pool of flesh and blood, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a blood giant. It had no eyes, no heart, and no vital organs. On the surface of the body, there was semi-solid blood flowing slowly. There was only a vague outline of the head. It cast a spell towards Soren, then raised its fist and smashed towards him. It can change its form and cast divine spells. Soren's figure disappeared and quickly moved away. He murmured, "Looks like it's a demigod. Blasphemy. Ineffective." The strange demonic language was heard and instantly pierced Soren's soul. Unfortunately, this kind of attack was useless. Soren had accumulated a lot of resistance over the years, so he was not afraid of this kind of attack that directly controlled the enemy. The blood giant rushed towards Soren. He could feel that the power of the ground was gathering towards it, and its form, which was far more than a spirit, was gradually changing into a form similar to a spirit. Rumble. Although it was semi-solid flesh and blood, a huge crater was formed when it hit the ground. Soren flew past the side of the enemy, and with the cold light of his sword, another shocking wound appeared. However, the enemy's body quickly recovered. The blood is like a layer of protection. It's basically useless to attack the outside. But I can't touch the blood directly. This thing is quite corrosive. If I get entangled, it'll be hard to get away. In just a short while, the enemy's form changed again. The body of the blood giant was distorted. It was originally in the form of a human, but now it had the appearance of a full-armed King Kong. In an instant, its explosive power was greatly increased, and it rushed towards Soren at an astonishing speed. The form changed. It seemed that the ability it possessed had also changed. This was the ability of the legendary transfiguration. Its own attributes and characteristics would change with the transformation. In the face of this kind of enemy with high physical resistance, Soren was really a bit difficult to deal with. However, he was not completely helpless. He quickly pulled away, and the curved sword in his hand disappeared, replaced by a ball of flame. Melf's Minute Meteors, Enhanced Spell. The jumping flame appeared in Soren's palm, and as he moved at an amazing speed, there were strange flame shadows in the air. Rumble. A violent explosion sounded. When Soren raised his palm and threw out the Minute Meteors, the huge body of the enemy immediately exploded. Flesh and blood splattered. An obvious crater appeared. Soren did not stop at all. One after another, Minute Meteors whizzed out. In the deafening explosion, the blood giant in front of him was getting smaller and smaller. Its whole body had been blown up by Soren. Melf's Minute Meteors, Enhanced Spell. After a round of Melf's Minute Meteors, Soren seemed to feel that the lethality was not enough, so he directly replaced it with Melf's Minute Meteors with Enhanced Spell Memory. This time, the effect of the explosion was even more amazing. Although Melf's Minute Meteors did not cause much damage directly, its damage penetration ability was quite strong. Otherwise, it would not be called God-slaying spell. Many adventurers relied on it to break the defensive field of the Saint form. No. Soren could only use it to kill the enemy in front of him bit by bit. Anyway, the opponent was not as fast as him, and various control spells were basically ineffective against Soren. In this case, he could completely kite the enemy and did not have to fight head-on. Rumble. 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 After a round of Melf's Minute Meteors, the blood giant's body was getting smaller and smaller. Its own regeneration speed could not keep up at all, and the accumulated spell damage had made its injury worse. Melf's Minute Meteors, Enhanced Spell. The flame of Minute Meteors appeared in Soren's palm again. As a half-baked wizard, the number of spells he had mastered was far less than other people. However, there seemed to be an advantage to this. That was, Soren had enough spell slots to remember more Melf's Minute Meteors. He did not have to reserve life-saving spell slots like other wizards. Soren's rogue ability was enough. All of his spell slots were used to memorize buff and attack spells. After one round, there was another round. Regardless of whether he could kill the enemy in front of him or not, he had to throw out all the Melf's Minute Meteors first. Chapter 496. Rumble. The blood giant's huge body finally became smaller and smaller. When it became the size of a normal human, Soren finally saw a soul that was invisible to the naked eye. This was the perception of a god. If it was defeated by a normal human, it would be difficult to kill it. However, in a battle between gods, Soren could directly destroy the source of the opponent's soul. It was a twisted soul. The chaotic will had completely taken control of it, and even its original appearance was gone. How sad. Although it was also a demigod, the evil god in front of Soren was already completely twisted. A god without a physical body was completely different from a god with a physical body. The growth of the evil god in front of him was completely dependent on blood sacrifice and worship. Wherever the Aborigines prayed to it, it would change in that direction. In the end, because it was contaminated with too many evil sacrifices, it could not even maintain the body of its soul. Compared to the soul Soren had seen in the past, the evil god in front of him had lost even more of itself. The path of a god was difficult. If Soren hadn't destroyed the will of the Dread Lord, he would have ended up in a crazy state. Will and faith. As a god, if he didn't have a strong enough will, even his priesthood could interfere with his thoughts. This was because the gods had to receive too many prayers every day. For thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of prayers every day. If it was a normal human, they would have gone crazy on the spot. Only a god with a strong will and power could withstand so much crazy information. That was why some ancient gods gave up their priesthoods and went into seclusion, retaining only their divine power. Death Jurgil was like this, and so was Gaia. The gods also had their own responsibilities. They didn't have as much freedom as demons and devils. Even the most fallen evil god knew that his followers were his sheep, and he had the responsibility to protect them. With a priesthood came a corresponding responsibility. Perhaps some priesthoods were easy, but they were undoubtedly weak. The god of death had to maintain the flow of the river Styx. He would receive and distribute the souls and decide whether the souls would return to the god's kingdom or somewhere else. The god of light protected justice. No matter how evil the world was, he had to ensure that there was justice and kindness in the world. The priesthood itself was a responsibility given to the gods by the world. Even the weak goddess of dance had to fulfill the obligations of the priesthood. Soren's half-elf priesthood was naturally the same. If he didn't fulfill his responsibility as a god, then he had to pay the price. The price might be death. Becoming a god and living in seclusion was an unrealistic idea. Whether it was Jurgil, the god of death, or Gaia Mother, they were both very powerful ancient gods. Even if they gave up their priesthood, other gods with greater divine power might not be able to defeat them. So they could easily live in seclusion and live the life they wanted. However, without sufficient divine power, if a god were to give up his priesthood, it would mean that the enemy would launch a crazy counterattack. Shadow Strike. Soren looked at the souls that were gradually dissipating in front of him, and his expression was quite calm. As a god with a physical body, he naturally had a higher starting point than these souls. Because there was a physical body, there was a foundation. The soul was too easy to be distorted and reshaped. Looking at the various changes in the Bator Inferno and the Abyss, the soul itself had a high ability to integrate energy, but this integration was too easy to be disturbed by power. Ascending to godhood with a spirit body was easy to be kidnapped by faith. Soren's current situation was an example. The indigenous people prayed to it for power, hoping to defeat the enemy. In the end, it was like cultivating a demon-like evil god. If the believers prayed to it for good weather, maybe it would have another future. A row of data appeared in front of him. You've killed the demigod soul. Extracting the target's soul energy. You've gained 125,000 slaughter EXP. The target has divinity. Extracting the target's divinity. You've gained 3 divinity. The target has divinity. Extracting the target's divinity. You've gained 2 divinity. The target has divinity. Unknown mutated energy detected. Target's divinity compatibility is 23%. Absorbing target's divinity will be seriously affected. Do you want to absorb? The soul's body turned into primitive energy and dissipated. Soren looked at the altar in front of him and shook his head. Give up absorbing. Chaotic divinity. The divinity that was completely composed of blood sacrifice was not pure at all. It was a heterogeneous power. Soren did not need this kind of power. The divinity he needed should be gathered from the believer's faith, not the divinity brought by the scene in front of him. This power was chaotic and evil, and once the divinity's power was absorbed, it was equivalent to merging into his body. He was not confident that he could transform this power with his own divinity before he became a god. The divinity on the altar was dissipating. Through the divinity's vision, Soren saw that the blood-red light gathered on this land was dimming little by little. With the fall of the evil god, the divinity it possessed would also dissipate. It would not be long before the altar was abandoned. The battle was almost over. When Soren got rid of the evil god that the natives served, their fighting spirit had disappeared. A light appeared. Everything in front of Soren suddenly became as bright as day, followed by a second light and finally a third light. Divinity, divinity, clergy. 3 huge forces exploded in Soren's mind in an instant, and then turned into a powerful soul force that reshaped his soul. Finally, these forces began to flow into his body. A row of data appeared in front of him. Divine form achieved. Divinity requirement is minor divinity. Current divinity is minor divinity. Meet the requirements for transforming into saint form. Divinity requirement is minor divinity. Current divinity is minor divinity. Meet the requirements for transforming into saint form. Possess clergy, half-elf. Meet the requirements for transforming into saint form. Transforming into saint form requires the extraction of divinity to strengthen the body. After the strengthening, the body will have extraordinary characteristics. Do you wish to transform? Without a doubt, Soren immediately nodded and said, proceed with the transformation. Extracting divinity from the body. Insufficient divinity. Saint form transformation failed. Can extract soul energy for transformation. Transformation into saint form requires 300,000 slaughter EXP. Do you wish to transform? Soren said with certainty, continue with the transformation. A huge force surged through his body. Because he did not have enough divinity and did not inherit the divine power of fear like the demigod vampire, Soren could only consume slaughter EXP. Saint form transformation completed. Obtained the basic ability of saint form, divine transcendence. Obtained the basic ability of saint form, spell immunity 1 to 3. Saint form transformation completed. He had finally reached this step. At this moment, the world in front of Soren's eyes seemed to be different. There were 2 ways to have the saint form. One was to become a god like the vampire god, and automatically get the saint form when becoming a god. The second way was to reach the standard of a god, and one would automatically have the ability to change into the saint form. The saint form was just a starting point. The power of the saint form was also completely different. The difference between the saint form with great divinity and the saint form with weak divinity was like heaven and earth. But as long as he entered the saint form, he could have a very abnormal ability, which was the legendary monk's divine transcendence. Divine transcendence, saint form. The saint form of the gods has long surpassed the realm of mortals. Their bodies will not be hurt by ordinary weapons. Any weapon below the extraordinary level cannot hurt them because their bodies have been integrated with the power of the law. With the ability of divine transcendence, they are immune to any weapon damage below +1. Spell immunity 1 to 3, saint form. The gods have integrated themselves with the power of the law, and their own spell resistance has been greatly strengthened. From now on, no matter what kind of spell it is, as long as it is of the 3rd circle or below, then the gods will be completely immune to such spells. Whether it is the effect of the spell or the damage caused by the spell, it will not have any effect on the saint form of the gods. Physical immunity, ordinary weapon attack. Magic immunity, spells below the 3rd circle. This was the power of the saint form. It was also the reason why so many people tried to kill the gods in the past. Minor divinity, all attributes +2. Minor divinity, all attributes +1. After killing the evil god in front of him, Soren finally reached the standard of the gods. At this moment, he really had the power of the gods. At this moment, his attributes had become: name, Soren, saint form, demigod. Race, half-elf, son of slaughter. Attributes: strength 21, +9, giant strength +6, dexterity 29 +4, constitution 24, +4, intelligence 24, +4, wisdom 18 +3, charm 19 +3. Alignment: lawful evil profession. Level 10 commoner, level 7 thief, 0326500, level 8 shadow dancer, 0425000, level 10 wizard, 0217500, level 1 arcanist, 0255000, grade 5. Health points, 272355, strong. Experience points, 115075, slaughter EXP, 7545, profession EXP, Unassigned. Skill points, none attribute points, none legend level, 100 divinity points, 30, minor divinity. Requires 100 points to upgrade, minor divinity. Divinity points, 10, minor divinity. Requires 30 points to upgrade, minor divinity. Divine power points, 0/200, requires 100 divine power points to upgrade to minor divine power. Master the divine law of change form. The limit of divine power stored in the divinity was 200 points. Clergy, half-elf, rogue domain, pirate status, normal basic skills, sneak 305, literacy 290, steal 105, pick lock 120, snare 85, focus 125, negotiate 155, appraise 65, deceive 60, intimidation 245, taunt 30, perform 75, listen 75, dodge 185, parry 75, block 60, heal 85, search 55, detect 70, copy scroll 60, spell identification 50, survival 80, use magic device 55, cooking 40, alchemy 30. Saint form. Transcendence, magic immunity 1 to 3. Demigod abilities. Language proficiency, character proficiency, interdimensional communication. Legendary skills. Omnipotent hands, legendary evasion, legendary combat skills, epic dexterity. Special abilities. God Slayer, Blessing of the Misfortune Goddess, Blessing of the Ocean Goddess, Dragon Blood Baptism LV2, Heart of Slaughter, Slayer, Death Walker, Ascetic, Erudite, Blasphemy, once per day. Personal abilities. Nimble left hand, eidetic memory, perseverance, encyclopedic knowledge, skilled spellcasting, reflex evasion, intuitive evasion, roll evasion, agile movement, evade sight, dark vision, spellcasting, spell control, empower spell, maximize spell, minor magic resistance, minor cold resistance, medium fire resistance, minor poison resistance, minor electric resistance, greater dual wielding, strengthen, regeneration, intermediate, telepathy 10 feet. Profession abilities. Arcane memory, arcane counterspell, arcane runes, shadow control, nimble mind, military weapon, proficiency, curved sword, legendary. Combat skills. Summon shadow, shadow jump, 200 meters, shadow strike, shadow jump, 2 times, fear gaze, divinity, fear, divinity, vampiric touch, divinity, sword form, heavy slash, sword form, horizontal slash, sword form, beheading, sword form, waist slash, sword form, spinning strike, spinning slash. Battle after battle. He had lost so much blood and suffered so many injuries. Soren had finally entered the realm of the gods at this moment. All of his attributes, abilities had basically reached the standard of the other weak gods. The only shortcoming was that his basic skills were slightly lower, but this was only because he had accumulated them for too short a time. The other gods had hundreds of points in all of their basic skills because they had existed for too long. Even if they were an ordinary person. They could also improve their basic skills to a good level after hundreds of years of accumulation. This was the difference in time. Soren could also slowly accumulate them after he became a god in the future. A special power broke out. Soren suddenly felt his body rising into the air, but this was actually just an illusion. He was still in the same place, but his consciousness instantly crossed space and appeared in a bright galaxy under some kind of power. Everything under his feet was quickly becoming smaller. Soren saw an island scattered around the coast, a continent that was gradually shrinking, a world of ice and snow that stretched for thousands of miles in the north, and a glacier that towered into the clouds in the South Pole. A vast and boundless sea. The largest continent was in the center, and the other 2 continents were in more barren places. Among them, there was a terrible desert that occupied nearly half of the continent's area. That was a disaster left over from the Arcane Empire. Finally, Soren saw a plain that supported the world as if the mountains, rivers, and land were just a picture scroll, the work of a powerful god. This was the material plane. Soren's figure stood under the endless starry sky. He saw the other planes that were quickly passing by in the astral world, which were other independent worlds. They could be half-planes left over from the long river of history, or they could be some material planes that had not been discovered yet. Above his head was a bright starry sky, but when he looked over, what he saw was not the stars, but the kingdoms of countless gods. There was a dimly lit kingdom that was calling out to him, as if it was waiting for his return. Soren stood in the void. Behind him was a bright galaxy, and everything in front of him was so shocking. This was a scene that only the gods were qualified to see. His consciousness began to fall. When Soren opened his eyes again, he was still standing in the same place. There were mottled blood stains on the ground, and everything he saw just now was like an illusion. But he knew that it was not an illusion. Chapter 497. There were cries and screams in the indigenous tribe. The elite pirates harvested the heads expressionlessly, giving a quick death to the indigenous warriors who were injured but not dead. More than 2,000 troops had occupied every corner of the indigenous tribe. Although there were still scattered sounds of fighting, they were quickly cleaned up. The whole tribe was covered with a strong smell of blood. The pirates were used to it, but many half-elves were pale. These half-elves had not experienced much fighting, and they were far worse than the experienced pirates. Soren stood in place and thought for a long time. After a while, the figure of Scarface appeared in front of him, bowed and said, "Your Excellency Soren. All the rebels have been cleaned up." "Very good." Soren turned and looked at him and said in a deep voice, "How are the casualties?" Scarface immediately replied, 70 or 80 people died and more than 300 were injured. I have arranged for people to treat them. The casualties were not bad. Soren nodded when he heard the words. No matter how strong he was in this kind of battle, the pirates under his command would inevitably have casualties. However, this level was still within the acceptable range, but it would affect his next plan. Everything is going according to the plan. Soren glanced at the indigenous slaves who were circled together and said in a deep voice, "First, find out the nearby terrain and set up a cordon outside. There should be an indigenous tribe here. Be careful of their sneak attack at night." Scarface replied, "Understood." The sacrifice just now was obviously made by different groups of indigenous people. The oil paint on both sides was different. They should belong to another tribe. Soren was not in a hurry to attack them, but he was going to stabilize the operation here first. The size of the indigenous tribe was not small. The population was probably close to 8 or 9,000 people. So many captives could not be digested in a short time. Soren was going to send all the dangerous captives to the city of Mordor. Because the evil god they served died in the hands of Soren, many warriors in the indigenous tribe also gave up resistance. These warriors could not stay here. As long as they were given the chance, they would be able to obtain anything and use it as a weapon to threaten the pirates under Soren's command. They had to be sent to the city of Mordor to work as coolies. If they were too difficult to control, they would be shipped to the south coast as slaves and sold. Many places liked to use these fierce indigenous warriors as gladiators. The warriors were cleaning up the battlefield. Many of the aborigines had gold and silver ornaments on them, which were directly stripped off. The mines on Treasure Island were quite rich, but because there was no trade, the natives made all kinds of crude ornaments out of the gold. Soren's purpose in coming here was to further increase his wealth. Now that he had more and more troops under his command, he could still hold on with the support of trade. If the Avatar crisis broke out in the future, all trade would inevitably be hit hard. At that time they would lose most of their income from trade. They could only rely on the resources of Treasure Island to support these troops. This was also the reason why Soren was so generous when he promised that he would be exempt from paying taxes for the next 2 to 3 years. The reason was simple. The Avatar crisis lasted for more than 2 years before and after. It was not until the end of the turbulent period that the damage slowly recovered. Basically, all the chambers of commerce could only make more money this year. After that, it would be difficult to trade at all. Well, Soren was really like the devil sometimes because he did not violate his promise. He just foresaw that the future trade would not be so good. If anyone could make a fortune in the turbulent period, it was their own ability. Naturally, the merchants did not know this. Recently, because Mordor City had accepted so many half-elves, the demand for various materials was quite high. On the one hand, they were busy transporting goods to Soren and trying to gain more favor from the Pirate King. On the other hand, they were buying materials from all over the world and selling them in Mordor City. They were trying to avoid taxes for the next 4 or 5 years, and then they could get a flag or something from the Pirate King. In this way they could walk sideways on the sea. Basically, no one would come to provoke them. Soren's funds were flowing out in large amounts. In addition to food and other important materials, everything else that could be hoarded was sent to Mordor by ship. This money could still buy a large number of materials now, but by next year, it was estimated that they would not be able to buy much. The war destroyed the production. Everything that was prepared now was to deal with the future changes. So, pieces of gold and silver were moved out of the houses of the indigenous nobles. At a glance, there was a large pile of shiny gold. Bah! Scarface spat and rubbed his hands excitedly. I didn't expect these guys to be so rich. Your Excellency Soren. Why don't we do it again? Soren glanced at him and slowly shook his head. Don't be too hasty. The most important thing now is to escort the captives back. There is a gold mine nearby. Next, you stay here and arrange for people to mine. I'll let the giants stay too. If anything happens, they can deal with it. Be careful of the other indigenous people on this island. Don't be careless. Scarface had suffered a loss on Snake Island, so he immediately nodded and said, Understood. Don't worry, Your Excellency. I won't make the same mistake a second time. Although the giant was the least intelligent among the many pirate leaders, his combat power was strong enough. Although he had not reached the realm of legends, the swamp giant's bloodline directly gave him the combat power of a legendary level. Soren sent him to Arendelle to deal with the Vrykol pirates, and the effect was quite good. He had a good relationship with Scarface, so staying here could deter other forces. In case of a battle, he did not have to worry about not being able to defeat the enemy. After all, many creatures above the legendary level on this island could not go too far away. Spirits were similar to earthbound spirits. A day passed quickly. The next day, Soren arranged for some of the captives to be escorted back. There was no need to leave too many people here. At most, 1,000 people were enough to mine the gold mine. However, the garrison was still strong because there were too many dangerous creatures on the Treasure Island. There were likely to be monsters on the route back to Motor Island and Treasure Island. Soren was not ready to go back himself, but he would let the mutant killer whale escort them. In the future, the mutant killer whale would be a sea monster entrenched here. It would include the route into its territory, so other sea monsters could be prevented from approaching. In the sea, every sea monster would not easily step into the territory of other monsters. Chapter 498. Strange flames leaped. A shaman priest wearing a bone mask picked up some black powder and sprinkled it into the flames. The rising flames instantly exploded, and countless scenes could be vaguely seen inside. A special power shrouded here, and some existence in the earth seemed to be awakened. This power awakened with the ancient prayer, and then gradually integrated into the body of the old shaman. Soon, he trembled and closed his eyes as if he was connecting with some kind of existence. Danger. Don't provoke the enemy. Outsiders. Very dangerous. A vague message sounded in his mind. The old shaman trembled and stopped. Then he slowly opened his eyes and said, The ancestral spirit has given me an oracle. Don't provoke those outsiders, be careful of them. In front of the shaman was a totem pole. It was different from the indigenous people that Soren destroyed. The spirit here was not so crazy and evil, and it even had a certain wisdom. When it was awakened, the aura it emitted was not kind, but it was not so evil either. It was more like a neutral power. There was silence in front of him. In front of the old shaman was a group of indigenous leaders. They were the most powerful warriors in the tribe, but at this moment, there was a trace of fear on their faces. The tribe that had been fighting for a long time suddenly disappeared. Such a thing could not be hidden from the indigenous people living here. But when they knew that their opponents were really destroyed, they did not feel ecstasy but deep fear. It was just one night. The enemy tribe that they had been fighting for hundreds of years was destroyed just like that. Even the evil god they served was not spared. Terrifying. Dangerous. Fearful. After learning this news, the oldest shaman immediately decided to awaken the ancestral spirit and asked it to guide the tribe. He hoped to know what happened to these outsiders from the ancestral spirit. Such a thing was too terrifying. If these outsiders could wipe out their enemies in one night, they could probably wipe them out in one night as well. In the face of such a major event of the survival of the tribe, even the oldest shaman did not know what to do. So they could only pray to the ancestral spirit for help. But the ancestral spirit had given them very little information, and there was even a piece of information that he hadn't told his own people. That is, the ancestral spirits told him that the enemy was very powerful and dangerous. If there was a conflict, even the ancestral spirits would not be able to defeat the terrifying outsider. The best way was to move the entire tribe to another island. That way they could avoid the calamity of extermination. The ancestral souls were filled with wisdom. The old shaman priest was convinced of this. This was because the souls of the ancestors they served were definitely not the evil gods of the enemy tribes. There was a huge gap between the two in essence. The inheritance of the ancestral spirit made them more rational. Although this tribe wasn't as strong as the one Soren faced, it was much more civilized. They had better defensive facilities, specialized blacksmiths to forge weapons and equipment, and had even tried to tame the velociraptors of Treasure Island. Therefore, even if the ancestral spirits could not bestow upon them the power to make their warriors go berserk, they still fought against their enemies for hundreds of years, and gradually strengthened their tribe. Right now, a difficult choice was placed in front of them. That was the appearance of the terrifying outsiders. What should they do in the future? Leaving their home was tantamount to giving up everything here. They had to start anew in an unknown and dangerous environment. The price they had to pay was quite heavy. That was why the old shaman didn't tell the others. If he told them this, the tribe would soon be in panic. Now, the only thing they could do was to wait and hope that these outsiders would not attack them. The old shaman looked into the distance. He heard the children playing in the tribe and the women scolding and reprimanding. These poor people didn't know that an unprecedented disaster was about to come. The survival of the entire tribe was seriously threatened. The village was busy. Relying on his memory, Soren quickly found the approximate location of the gold mine. But even if he took it, he couldn't immediately mine it. Soren needed to mobilize manpower and tools, and he had to do it secretly. Because until now, many of his men didn't know what was on this island. They only thought that they were here to rob the Aborigines. This matter had to be handed over to his trusted men. Soren asked the one-eyed man to personally go to the south coast to mobilize manpower. It would be best if he could directly bring back some people who were proficient in mining. Soren didn't care about the specific methods used. He only cared about the manpower and tools he saw during the mission time. The Aborigines were quite poor. Apart from the gold and silver mines here, there was basically nothing that could be taken out. Even the most powerful shaman didn't have many rare grade equipment. The level of their civilization was too low, and they only inherited part of the knowledge of voodoo. Almost a week had passed. Soren needed a lot of time to go back and forth. He couldn't stay on the treasure island for too long, so a lot of things had to be done at once. Unfortunately, the half-elf first mate had to stay on Raging Sand Island. Otherwise, with him there, Soren could have just left everything to him because the half-elf first mate was still very capable of doing things. The first batch of captives had been sent away. Soren asked the Aborigines to renovate the village, and then ordered the materials on the warship to be transported down. Half of the people went back. Half of the people stayed here. Soren spent 3 days to leave a teleportation mark here so that if there was an emergency in the future, he could directly use teleportation to support. When the third batch of slaves was also transported away, Soren finally finished everything here and was ready to return to Port Mordor first. Nearly 1,000 people were left on the treasure island, as well as about 2,000 indigenous captives. When the one-eyed man came back, other pirates would be transferred to guard. These elites couldn't be left in this place. Time ticked by and it was June. There was only about half a year left before the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. Soren didn't know what the current situation of Autumnfall was. The biggest inconvenience overseas was the information congestion. Port Mordor could still rely on the prosperous trade to collect a lot of information, but it was completely impossible on the treasure island. Now the situation on the mainland was constantly changing. Soren couldn't stay here for too long. So, the next day after dealing with many affairs, Soren decided to return to Port Mordor in person. Next, this was the most important thing that would determine his future destiny. Chapter 499. The gentle sea breeze blew on his face. George walked briskly towards the dock. He could buy the freshest seafood here every morning. Now that he had a firm foundation in Mordor, he naturally had to add some meat to his family from time to time. All the seafood in the port of Mordor was very cheap. A lobster the size of a fist was only 3 or 5 copper dirhams. A fresh sea fish could be eaten for several days. George quickly selected the goods and then returned to his place of residence. It was just dawn today and he had to report to the garrison immediately after he went back. The small courtyard where George lived was in the east of Mordor. It was a small independent brick courtyard with 2 rooms and 1 living room. Outside was a dug drainage ditch and there was a well next to it. There was some land in the small courtyard and there was a space for clothes. He cleaned it up 2 days ago and planted some lettuce with his sister. In this way he would not have to buy any vegetables from outside in the future. As a civilian professional, although George had spent a lot of money, he still knew how to be frugal when it came to living his life. "You're back." His sister's gentle voice sounded in his ears. She made a gesture to George and whispered, "Why did you buy so many things again? What if you can't finish them?" His little nephew was sleeping inside. The more George looked at this little guy, the more he liked him, especially his big black eyes which always made people feel full of spirit. George believed that he would grow into an excellent man in the future. Although he joined the garrison of Mordor and had a generous reward, whenever George wanted to persuade his sister not to go to work but to stay at home to take care of the child, his sister always shook her head stubbornly. She had always been a very strong woman. This might be because of their family's bloodline. Their mother also raised them like this. Breakfast was oatmeal, salted fish, lettuce, and seafood that was not eaten yesterday. The garrison took care of lunch and dinner. The training in Mordor was very strict. As a selected elite, George did not patrol like other people, but he received quite strict professional warrior training every day. This also led to his huge appetite. His sister just smiled gently next to him and added a little food to him from time to time. Although George used to be a militia, he never had the feeling of supporting the whole family like today. This was a man's responsibility. This responsibility made him stronger and more confident. Their daily training was double that of the other soldiers. In addition to the harsh combat training, they would also learn some simple knowledge in the afternoon. Some people said that they were the officers that Sir Soren had prepared. George didn't know if this was true, but he knew that there were people being eliminated every day, and he definitely didn't want to be eliminated. He wanted to give his sister a better life. His sister's gentle prayer sounded in his ears. To George, Sir Soren was more like an expert that he worshipped rather than a god that he believed in. Therefore he only prayed once because he was only a general believer. However, it was different for her sister. Sir Soren seemed to occupy a very important position in her heart. She would pray devoutly before every meal to thank Sir Soren for everything he had given her. Although it was not an official prayer ceremony, he would lower his head slightly every time his sister prayed. Thank you, Sir Soren. It was he who brought him a new life, away from war, disease and hunger. Here he could have more opportunities and a better future. And all of this was given to him by Sir Soren. George felt that it was difficult for him to really believe in a god, but this did not prevent him from expressing his loyalty to Sir Soren. Perhaps some people were born with a hard time becoming devout fanatics. Thank you, Lord Soren, for giving us all this. May the Lord be immortal in his glory. His sister stopped praying. She gently lifted her long hair with her white fingers, looked at George in front of her gently and whispered, "Go and train when you're full. I heard that if you can be selected, you may become an officer in the future. My little George may become a general in the future." Faith was just a very normal part of life. His sister would pray briefly 3 times a day, and then go to the priest for a formal prayer every week. For her, the most important thing now was that her brother could seize this opportunity to stand out. Such a habit was very common in Mordor. People would pray a few words before eating, and then hold a formal prayer every week. For ordinary people, the most important thing was still life. Faith was just a very normal part of life. Don't worry. George nodded with a smile and said, "I will try my best to pass the test." After that he turned and walked outside. As a seed selected by the garrison of Mordor, George had achieved his initial goal, which was to have an independent small courtyard. A home of his own. Now he had a bigger dream. He hoped that he could become a strong man. The dreams of small people always grew bigger little by little. Some simple knowledge allowed him to learn a lot. He hoped that he could learn enough one day. It had begun to get busy outside. Mordor was being expanded every day, but the most important thing now was to build a temple that belonged to Lord Soren. The best craftsmen on the south coast were invited here. People were busy preparing every day because this would be the first temple of Lord Soren in the mortal world. Now that the foundation of the temple had been built, George sometimes saw mysterious spellcasters. They only needed to chant a spell and they could turn the soil into solid rock. This magical ability made him feel awe. Although it wasn't completed yet, the entire temple looked like it was integrated into a single entity. Perhaps it was not as magnificent as the Temple of Wealth, nor was it as tall and magnificent as the Temple of Sea, but anyone who saw it for the first time would feel a kind of solemnity, as if everything in front of them was in order. There were more and more pedestrians outside. People from Autumnfall quickly got used to the order of the city. They gradually accepted the new life and integrated as much as possible. Because there was a future and hope here. Even the lowliest commoners yearned for a better life in the future. George could not help but speed up his pace. Today there was still a harsh training waiting for him. Only by persisting to the end could he have a better future. Raging Sand Island. The half-elf first mate looked at the document in front of him. After a few glances, he murmured, "Have the orcs and half-elves entered a stalemate? It seems that this Earthwalker is also a very powerful legendary figure. Come. Send this information to Mordor immediately." Since Soren went to Treasure Island, he temporarily took over the affairs of the south coast. As a half-elf pirate at the bottom, he had always been cautious. Because he was not the most powerful pirate leader, but he was the most powerful one among all the pirate leaders. All along he had been desperately improving himself. He did not have the bloodline of the giants, so everything could only be done through hard training. Every pirate leader was a competitor. The half-elf first mate was not willing to easily give up his power, so he had to work harder. Adele Isabella was transferred away. But the other pirate leaders were still unwilling to fall behind because they knew that they could go further. Yes. The half-elf first mate thought that Sir Soren just wanted to build a sea kingdom, but he never expected that Sir Soren was actually preparing to become a god. That was a god. If Sir Soren really became a god, the situation would be different for his subordinates. Gods could not do everything by themselves. Even in the future, Sir Soren might return to the kingdom of God. At that time he would need a spokesperson in the mortal world. Not a spokesperson like a church pastor, but a spokesperson to help him rule and control the pirate army. In this case there was no doubt that these pirate leaders could go further. The half-elf first mate fell into deep thought. As the smartest and most resourceful pirate leader, he believed that he was more suitable for this position than the other pirate leaders. He had enough loyalty to Sir Soren. Perhaps he was not the strongest in combat, but in all aspects he believed that he was far more competitive than the others. Now, the most important thing was to show himself to Sir Soren. The military parade was an important opportunity. If he could do everything beautifully, there was no doubt that his status in Sir Soren's eyes would be further improved. Come. The half-elf first mate seemed to have thought of something. He stood up and said, "Prepare a warship. I want to go to the City of Wealth. Port Tylon Sea Temple." The figure of the Naga Siren priest stood in the pool behind the temple for a long time without moving. After a long time, she let out a faint sigh and said slowly, "Has the enchantment of the Dragon Bone warship been completed?" A faint voice came and replied, "It's almost done. Magic sails, Dragon Bone ram, hull reinforcement." The expression on the Naga Siren priest's face was quite complicated at the moment. After a while she waved and said, "Get ready to send it over. It seems that he intends to show his power on the south coast." She never dreamed that Soren's ambition was to become a god. Thinking back, the scene of him begging her to remove the influence of energy absorption was still in front of her, but in the blink of an eye, he had become an existence that she had to look up to. At this moment, the Naga Siren priest's heart was full of thoughts. P.S. I can't sleep at night, so I just got up and wrote a chapter. There's one more today. Chapter 500. The monsoon from the southwest sea brought a new round of torrential rain. Many fishing boats fishing in the offshore areas returned to the port of Mordor. Ships of marine products were transported up by sailors, many of which would be made into salted fish and transported to other places to be sold. The profit of selling salted fish was not in the fish. More often than not, salted fish was directly sold as a substitute for sea salt because the amount of salt in these salted fish was actually quite good. A dark cloud appeared on the horizon in the distance. It was foreseeable that a heavy rain was about to hit. Many merchants were busy packing up, and the fleet also docked at the port and put away the sails. The sailors and laborers shouted to speed up the transportation of goods because as they gradually became familiar with the weather overseas, they also knew that the rainstorm would come faster than expected. The shops moved in the goods outside, but the tavern next door was still lively. Many pirates still lived a drunken life. The Temple of Wealth directly built a luxurious tavern in the port of Mordor. It provided expensive wine and beautiful women from the south coast. There were also some civilians in the port of Mordor. Most of them were craftsmen. They lived here after gaining freedom. Soren did not restrict them too much. They could come and go freely and live the life they wanted. But at this time, there were very few people who were really willing to leave because they heard that many places on the south coast were in chaos. The news in Port Mordor spread quickly. Many people were quite clear about the situation on the mainland. If they didn't fight here or there, they would be fighting there. Running out at this time was simply courting death. A cargo ship was slowly docked at the port. The dock clerk, about 50 years old and wearing a top hat, walked quickly over, followed by a little boy of 10 years old. Foreign ship. Medium-sized cargo ship. The docking fee is 5 silver dirhams a day. The clerk nodded with a smile, then stretched out his palm. Soon the captain threw a small money bag over. He shook the money bag and listened to the crisp sound inside. Then he quickly recorded with a smile, 10 silver dirhams, docking for 2 days. The little boy behind looked at him with wide eyes. He was just a little follower who occasionally ran errands for the adults. He could get 5 copper dirhams a day. If he was lucky, someone would give him something. So, the clerk left. It was going to rain soon. He was more or less a dignified official in the port of Mordor. He was responsible for collecting the fees for docking merchant ships. If he was drenched, it would be a loss of face. The sailors on the freighter began to move things. At this moment, two figures in black cloaks appeared on the deck. They nodded at the captain and jumped down lightly. "Is this Mordor City?" A slightly immature male voice sounded. The silver armor under the black cloak could be vaguely seen. He looked around carefully and murmured, "It's different from what I imagined. I thought this would be another city of wealth." The vicissitudes of life were watching them. An older man glanced around and said slowly, "It's indeed different from what we imagined. In the legends, the pirate King Sorin was a demon who killed without batting an eyelid. He was the son of the god of fear, a cruel dictator and a cunning villain. But along the way, whether it was Shipwreck Bay, Port Tylon, Raging Sand Island, or today's Mordor City, what we saw was order. I thought the pirates' rule would be brutal and chaotic, but never did I expect to see strict order and strict laws along the way. Moreover, it seems that the people under his rule, be it commoners or merchants, have a better life than other places." They had seen pirates on Raging Sand Island who were hung up by the law enforcement team and whipped more than 10 times. Their whole back was bloody. Along the way they saw the prosperity of the South Coast. When other places were in chaos and starvation, the whole South Coast still maintained normal order. People were not affected by the turmoil for the time being. The civilians in these places lived well. In a dark corner, some vague figures were watching the two men coming down from the freighter. One of them said slowly, "Who are they? Do we need to report them? Recently, there have been a lot of people coming to Port Mordor." The figure of the rogue was very inconspicuous in the corner. The man in the lead looked carefully for a while, then shook his head and said, "Just two paladins. There's no need to pay too much attention to them. They will leave after a while." The paladins were not a threat, because everything in Mordor City gave people confidence that they would not be enemies of the paladins. The two paladins were observing everything here. The legend of Sorin had spread throughout the continent, and there were various rumors about him everywhere. As the guardian of the world's justice and kindness, the paladins also noticed the legendary evil pirate king who rose rapidly. Sorin the Great Demon King? There were actually a lot of rumors about him, but it seemed that the rumors were different from what they saw in front of them. Because before coming to Mordor City, they imagined that Sorin should be an evil demon king. Countless people died under his hands. He used cruel rule and violence to control the South Coast, forcing others to surrender to him. Before coming to the South Coast, they heard a lot of rumors about him along the way. In addition to the powerful strength of Sorin, there were more rumors about his extravagance, cruelty, lawlessness, insidiousness, and so on. As if it was natural, they became extremely angry. As the paladins who guarded justice, they couldn't wait to kill Sorin the Great Demon King with their own hands. But as they got closer to the coast, the rumors they heard were not the same. The evil Sorin the Great Demon King seemed to have become an ambitious figure. He unified the pirates everywhere with an iron fist, and then took this opportunity to rise rapidly, and eventually became the most powerful pirate king in history. It seemed that people still said that he was ruthless and was an extremely ruthless figure, but it seemed that he was no longer described as a demon. They walked all the way forward. When they came to the bustling Port Tylon, their ideas were subverted again. The evil Sorin the Great Demon King became an idol here, and it was believed that he brought the wealth and status of Port Tylon today. Whether it was the route of Arendelle or the route of the Eastern Sea, Port Tylon now had the strength comparable to the City of Wealth. In the eyes of many civilians, the evil Sorin the Great Demon King was a wise ruler, a capable king-like figure. Although he still had the evaluation of being ruthless, and so on, all the other sayings seemed to have disappeared. As long as Sorin the Great Demon King was mentioned, even the lowest level of civilians knew that His Excellency attached great importance to his promises. His reputation among the civilians at the bottom seemed to have been reversed. Although people were in awe of him, they were also very supportive of him. Everything seemed to be a drama. In the end, the two paladins definitely came to see the legendary city of Mordor, the city of miracles that rose in the Outer Islands. It gathered a lot of wealth in a very short time and affected the trade structure of the entire South Coast. Mordor. This place, which was described in other rumors as Mordor, City of Demons, and City of Fear, completely subverted the ideas of the two paladins, and they really felt silent. The son of slaughter? The son of fear? A bloody and cold dictator? An evil and depraved wanderer? In this place called Mordor, what they saw was that civilians lived and worked in peace and prosperity. They saw that the law was strict and orderly. They saw an unprecedented city of civilization. There were no filthy and messy cities like other cities, nor were there poor refugees living on the streets. Even the laborers living at the bottom were wearing complete clothes and had a healthy blush on their faces, which meant that they had been away from hunger for a long time. They could hear the sound of children playing in their ears, the sound of merchants bargaining in front, and the solemn security team patrolling in the distance. Here, they actually saw something more prosperous, more vibrant, and more hopeful than the territory under the control of the Church of Glory. And all this was not brought by justice and kindness, but by a great demon king named Sauron. How ironic. Chapter 501. Your Excellency High Priestess. The priests and believers on both sides of the road humbly bowed their heads and gave way. The psionic warlock appeared in a black priest robe with gold and silver edges. There were mysterious rune marks in the cuffs, and a complex 9-pointed star array was engraved on her full chest. At this moment she had taken off the veil on her face, revealing a beautiful but slightly strange face, which meant that she was not a purebred human and had other bloodlines. The psionic warlock's expression was serious and solemn. She glanced at the others in front of her and slowly said, "Everyone else leave. Priests, follow me into the temple to pray." The magnificent temple looked integrated. As the high priestess of the church, she presided over the entire temple from design to completion. The location of the temple was chosen on the side of the central square, built in the most striking place in the center of Autumnfall. Because of the large use of the spell, mud to stone, the structure of the entire temple was quite stable. It could be understood as the existence of half a wizard tower. With the rise of Sauron's power, glorious status in the Northern Witch Council had also risen sharply. The Witch Council was obviously very willing to make friends with a new god, so the layout of the entire temple was up to the standard of the construction of a wizard tower. A temple was an unbreakable fortress. As the most important place of activity for the gods in the mortal world, any temple that was still operating must have the ability to fight against legendary powers. Or else, once there was a conflict in the future, the temple, as the core of the activity, would be pulled out by the enemy one by one, and it would be impossible to provide shelter for the priests and believers of the church. This temple, as the first and most important great temple of Sauron, may require millions of kindler to be invested in it. The cost may be more expensive than many wizard towers. However, only the outline of the temple had been completed. At present, only the construction part of the temple had been completed. The other aspects of magic guidance, rune engraving, array arrangement, and so on had not yet been started. When it was really completed, the energy field of the great temple could cover the entire island of Mordor and even directly affect the climate of the island. This was a huge project. Just like the temple in the City of Wealth, in the end, it might still need a Saint Necromancer to be in charge of guarding it. There were exquisite reliefs on the walls of the temple. They were all about Sauron's achievements. The half-elf craftsmen had engraved Sauron's achievements into reliefs. Currently, only a part of it had been completed and there was still a lot of space left. In the near future, they would continue to carve Sauron's other deeds into reliefs on the walls of the shrine. They might even carve the war between the gods. Of course, it wasn't just Sauron himself. If the heroes of the church did something legendary or epic, they would also leave behind a relief sculpture. 72 white marble pillars supported the structure of the temple. There was nothing engraved on them, but they seemed to have a special meaning. The interior of the temple was quite spacious. In the center of the hall was an exquisite and lifelike statue of a god. Sauron was shrouded in a cloak, holding a scimitar with both hands. His eyes were calmly looking into the distance as if he was looking into the future, and also as if he was protecting something. The statue was only an ordinary object at the moment. There was a faint glow of divine power on it, but it hadn't been fully activated yet. Only when the investiture ceremony began would Sauron's divine sense descend upon the statue. Only then would it be considered complete. This statue would be an important tool for Sauron to receive faith and prayers. It could greatly strengthen the connection between the believers and Sauron. Finally, Sauron could use the statue's eyes to observe everything. The high priestess figure came in front of the statue. As she slowly knelt down, the priests behind her also knelt down. Before the apotheosis ceremony, the statue needed to gather more divine power. It was difficult for ordinary mortals to provide enough power of faith. But these priests were different. At the very least, they were devout believers and they had stronger beliefs. Although believers made up the majority of the church's faith, The truly pure and powerful faith was always provided by these priests. If devout believers were a stream, then the priests were a river. My lord Soren, you are the master of the half-elves. You are the master of Mordor. You are the king of the pirates. My lord Soren, you are the protector of the half-elves. You are the forerunner in the shadows. You are the keeper of order. My lord Soren, your name will become sacred among the half-elves. You have led us through danger. You have given us a stable and orderly life. You are a wise ruler. Slaughter will make you stronger. The death of your enemies will spread your light. Your kingdom will protect our souls. When death comes, the servants who serve you will be reborn in your kingdom. My lord Soren, you will raise your kingdom high. Become the stars in the sky. Along with the orderly prayers, a faint glow of divine power appeared on the statue. This prayer would also sound when Soren was investiture. It would tell the world about the realm that Soren had when he was investiture. The first line was the most important part, representing the half-elves, Mordor, and the pirates. The second line was the less important part, representing the half-elves, rogues, and order. The third part was the core of the investiture, representing the half-elves, protection, order, rule, slaughter, death, and so on. Finally, it was the conclusion of the investiture. Throughout the entire prayer, only one part appeared in the first line of the 3 paragraphs, and that was half-elves. This represented Soren's core clergy. Mordor and the pirates were his foundation, the shadow was an extension of the rogues, and the order represented his faction. Slaughter referred to his identity as the son of slaughter. Rule represented his influence on Mordor, and death was an extension of slaughter. These all represented the realms that Soren himself had come into contact with, but his real core was only the half-elves. At the beginning of each paragraph, gods had many realms. Order told the world about his faction, and from now on, the gods of the Order faction would accept him and admit that he belonged to the side of Order. In the future, if he was strong enough, he might be able to master the Order realm, or even have the Order clergy. Order was a very powerful force. Almost most of the gods in the Order faction would have the power of Order, and there were many who had the Order realm. However, only some powerful gods could incorporate Order into their clergy. For example, the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, had the evil clergy, which was opposite to the good faction, and also had a very powerful chaos realm. This meant that the gods had mastered the power of the law from the origin. The core of Soren's investiture prayer was only half-elves, and everything else was an extension. As long as there was no direct conflict in the clergy, other gods would not be too hostile to him because of the collision of the extended realms. Because most of the gods had various extended realms, just like the gods who mastered the war clergy had basically dabbled in the realm of death. This kind of extension was a very common thing within the gods, which was equivalent to private competitors. However, if there was a direct conflict in the clergy, it might be a battle between 2 gods. Night fell. The psionic warlock, who had officially become the high priest, came to the port of Mordor in a cloak. Now everything in the temple was on the right track, and the investiture ceremony was also in full swing. Soren was directly investiture as a true god, not a false god, like the demigod vampire. The investiture ceremony of the demigod vampire was like the king of grass, but Soren could not be so hasty. Even if he wanted to keep a low profile, he must be as solemn as the founding ceremony. Therefore, there were still quite a lot of things to be prepared. The demigod vampire sneaked around and found that the believers had arranged altars. In the end, there was not even a decent temple, so he directly became a god. This kind of thing was also a joke among the gods. Soren absolutely could not do this. As the spokesperson of Soren, the high priest absolutely would not allow this. So she had been quite busy recently. And now there was another important thing waiting for her, that was the holy emblem of the church, which represented the half-elven church and Soren himself and his clergy. They needed to complete it before the investiture ceremony. The high priest was waiting for Soren's return. P.S. Help. I forgot to think about the holy emblem of the church in advance. Who has a good idea? Quickly come up with it. Waiting online. Chapter 502. Soren's return did not alarm too many people. Now Modo had attracted the attention of many outsiders. They were either disguised as merchants or sailors. They were all secretly observing this place and secretly guessing about Soren. The appearance of a new god was definitely not a trivial matter. If the situation on the continent had not been too chaotic, Modo City would have become the center of the whole world at this moment, attracting the attention of all forces. But even if the chaos had begun to spread, more and more people were secretly spying on Moto, but no one dared to be the first to stand out. After all, gods were gods after all. After Soren returned to Moto, the first thing he did was to go to his temple. Looking at the statue in the center of the temple that looked very similar to himself, Soren could not help but have a strange feeling in his heart. From a mortal to a god, this wonderful state made him feel like he was standing in the clouds looking down on all living beings. If Soren survived the Avatar crisis safely, as long as he did not seek death in the future, he would be able to stand in the long river of history and watch the flowers bloom and fall. The almost immortal nature of gods allowed them to bless the people they cared about and enjoy a long life. No one would feel that they were tired of living. No creature wanted to completely die out. The existence of gods would not be boring tools. Otherwise, the god of light and Mother Earth would not have produced the goddess of agriculture today. In fact, if it were not for the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, many hedonistic gods such as the goddess of love, the goddess of joy, the goddess of dance, and so on, would start a new pleasure after answering the prayers of their believers, or send an avatar to find novel things and explore the mysteries of the multiverse. Of course, most of these gods had a patron. They were the subordinate gods of a certain divine system and did not have much ambition to expand their own priesthood. Therefore, the joy of life was in the pursuit of things that made them happy. Unless there was a divine war with a certain god or there was some big movement in the divine system they belonged to, their real life was very leisurely, and they squandered their endless time. Of course, there were occasionally some weirdos among the gods. They were so lazy that they even found it troublesome to respond to the prayers of their believers. For such weirdos, their fate was basically needless to say. The dance goddess had a period of depravity. Indulging in forbidden pleasure, she rarely responded to her believers. If it weren't for the other friendly gods forcing her to straighten out, she would have been completely ruined by the Lady of the Night. This was the world of the gods. There were conscientious gods such as the god of light, the god of justice, the god of observation, and so on. There were also leisurely gods such as the goddess of love, the goddess of dance, the goddess of joy, and so on. There were also the god of exploration, the god of travel, the god of knowledge, who was addicted to the sea of knowledge and liked to preserve the information of various civilizations. There were also the evil gods who were busy with various conspiracies, the gods of chaos, and the goddess of fortune and the goddess of misfortune, who had nothing to do and were happy all day long. The last two twins of destiny were the typical undisciplined fellows who couldn't even respond to the prayers of their believers. They strolled along the river of time. From time to time, the two sisters would cause trouble for each other. Occasionally they would appear in the eyes of the world, but they only cared about things that interested them. When gods reached the level of the twin of destiny, they seemed to have a lot of freedom. It seemed that no one would be foolish enough to provoke them. Even the master gods with great divine powers would maintain respect for them. Soren still needed to complete the last step of the temple. That was to inject a trace of his divine sense into the statue in front of him. If the gods were not in the mortal world, this would require a huge prayer ceremony. In the end, the projection of the gods would appear, and then the whole process of opening the temple would be completed. Soren himself was still in the material plane, so he could only come in person and inject a part of his divine sense into the temple. From now on, as long as he wanted to, he could know everything in the temple at any time, but this would consume his divine power. A faint glow of divine power appeared on the statue, and in the end, it seemed to come alive. The eyes of the statue were surrounded by divine-like power. This was the palace of the gods in the mortal world. If Soren returned to the kingdom of God in the future, as long as he did not have to worry about consuming his divine power, then he could incarnate into the temple at any time. The preparation of the investiture ceremony was almost done. Now the last thing was the holy emblem of the church, which represented Soren's emblem. The high priest did not dare to make a decision on his own, so in the end, it was up to Soren to make the decision. The emblem of the gods had a special meaning. However, it could not be too complicated to the point that people could not recognize it. It would be inconvenient for the believers to walk around in the mortal world, but it could not be unknown either. It would be best if it was a holy emblem that people could recognize at a glance and feel that it was awesome. A holy emblem? Soren could not help but fall into deep thought, thinking about what kind of holy emblem he should use to represent himself. The abyss, shadow, slaughter, half-elves, wanderers, pirates. Soren had seen many emblems, but when it came to making one for himself, it was a little difficult. However, he was not a person who liked to struggle, so he quickly came up with an idea. The black soil, mixed with the dark red tone, represented the breath of the abyss. The gray shadow, moving forward in the killing, walked in the chaotic time. Soren looked up at the statue in front of him and quickly found inspiration. Under the effect of divine power, he directly changed the substance and quickly formed the shape of an emblem. On the black barren land with mottled blood, there was a gray shadow all around. The figure of a wanderer was shrouded in a cloak, looking calmly into the distance, as if he was looking at the future, as if he was protecting something. It was a very simple emblem. At a glance, it left a deep impression and it was very easy to recognize. It also had a kind of arrogant demeanor. The only drawback was that it did not have an obvious relationship with the half-elves' priesthood. However, Soren did not seem to care much about this, because he was making an emblem that represented himself. For him, the half-elves were only his priesthood, but it did not represent everything about him. Moreover, from the figure, Soren could easily recognize the characteristics of the half-elves. If someone carefully looked at this emblem, it would be easy to see that Soren's ambition did not lie with the half-elves. Shadow, slaughter, the breath of death. The whole holy emblem gave a feeling of oppression, as if it was looking at the future and seeing some terrible scenes, like a watcher walking in the shadows and killing. Soren completed the emblem with divine power, and finally injected his own power into it. After carefully looking at it, he could not help but nod with satisfaction. The high priest next to him had a strange expression, and the corner of her mouth could not help but twitch slightly. There were very few gods who directly used themselves as an emblem. In the past, the Dark Maiden, her emblem was a naked drow girl holding a silver sword and dancing under the full moon. Now that she had fallen, the emblem made by Soren reminded the high priest of this god, so she could not help but twitch the corner of her mouth. The Dark Maiden was a kind and tragic god. However, the master was an evil existence, and the emblem he chose might have a special meaning. A week passed in the blink of an eye. When the half-elves' temple was completely completed, the time for Soren to become a god was about to come. The whole city of Mordor was in the midst of intense preparations. Countless eyes were looking at this overseas island. A large number of believers began to gather. They held prayer ceremonies every day to let the power of faith condense over the temple. The priests changed into new robes and quietly bathed and changed their clothes, waiting for the moment when their master Soren became a god. They would be baptized again. After Soren officially became a god, he would give them divine spells. At that time, the traces left by the original god of rogues and half-elves would be completely erased. They only served one master, a god they believed in. That was Soren. The light of dawn shone. Neat prayers echoed over the city of Mordor. Tens of thousands of half-elves gathered near the square, surrounding the temple, waiting for the sacred moment to come. On this day, our master Soren will officially become a god. Chapter 503. My Lord Soren. You are the ruler of the half-elves. You are the master of Mordor. You are the king of pirates. My Lord Soren. You are the protector of the half-elves. You are the forerunner in the shadows. You are the keeper of order. My Lord Soren. Your name will become sacred among the half-elves. You have led us through the crisis. You have given us a stable and orderly life. You are a wise ruler. Killing will make you stronger. The death of the enemy spreads your glory. Your kingdom will bless our souls. When death comes, the servants who serve you will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Soren. You will lift up your kingdom. Turn into the stars in the sky. Neat prayers echoed over the city of Mordor. Tens of thousands of believers gathered around the temple. There were countless peeping eyes in the darkness. As long as they did not get close to the core area of Mordor, the guards hidden in the dark would not expel them. At this moment, the sky was still dark. It was not long before dawn. The timing of Soren's ascension surprised many people. He did not choose the afternoon, evening, or dusk, nor did he like to move around at night like other evil gods. The time he chose to ascend was dawn. The last touch of darkness before dawn. No one knew why Soren chose this time. Perhaps only he had the answer in his heart. My Lord Soren. You are the ruler of the half-elves. You are the master of Mordor. You are the king of pirates. My Lord Soren. You are the protector of the half-elves. You are the forerunner in the shadows. You are the keeper of order. My Lord Soren. Your name will become sacred among the half-elves. You have led us through the crisis. You have given us a stable and orderly life. You are a wise ruler. Killing will make you stronger. The death of the enemy spreads your glory. Your kingdom will protect our souls. When death comes, the servants who serve you will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Soren. You will raise the kingdom that belongs to you, transforming into the stars in the sky. The second prayer was heard. Accompanied by a faint holy light, the priests knelt down in the temple one by one. Then countless believers knelt down. The vast sea of people knelt down at his feet. The high priest stood in front of the statue of Soren and looked down at everything. A strange light appeared in his eyes. In an instant, a powerful psionic force field enveloped the entire square, connecting the souls of countless people together. Spirit force field. The prayers turned into a torrent, connecting everyone's hearts together. The devout faith shocked everyone's hearts. At this moment, even the wavering believers were completely integrated. Spirit force gathered at this moment, and they could sense the hearts of others. They could sense the power of faith, a spiritual sustenance, and a sense of security after receiving protection. My Lord Soren. You are the ruler of the half-elves. You are the master of Mordor. You are the king of pirates. My Lord Soren. You are the protector of the half-elves. You are the forerunner in the shadows. You are the keeper of order. My Lord Soren. Your name will become holy among the half-elves. You led us through danger. You gave us a peaceful life. You are a wise ruler. Killing will make you stronger. The death of the enemy spreads your glory. Your kingdom will protect our souls. When death comes, the servants who serve you will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Soren. You will raise the kingdom that belongs to you, transforming into the stars in the sky. The third prayer sounded. Invisibly, the voices that were a little uneven at first gradually merged into a whole. If the first prayer was a messy movement, then the second prayer was a melody that was directed by someone. When the third prayer sounded, tens of thousands of people turned into a whole, and all the voices were in unison. Tens of thousands of souls were fused together by faith, religion, and psionic power. In an instant, a considerable power of faith burst out. Every word they said became full of power. This powerful, holy word resounded over the island of Mordor, and even the nearby space trembled. The last touch of darkness disappeared, and the light of dawn appeared in the sky. That was the light of dawn. There was a dazzling holy light over the city of Mordor. At this moment, the entire temple burst out with powerful divine power. A beam of light rose from the statue and pierced the space into the sky in an instant. Stars emerged. At the last moment of darkness, a star that had been dim suddenly burst out with dazzling brilliance. Its light sprinkled over the city of Mordor, covering the whole city in the light. Countless people's hearts were calm, as if they felt an eternal peaceful kingdom. Their hearts were shrouded by a force, and an unprecedented shock spread through everyone's heart. My Lord Soren. You are the master of the half-elves. You are the master of Mordor. You are the king of pirates. The same voice came from the sky. It seemed to be the echo of tens of thousands of believers in the city of Mordor, but it came from the glorious sky above the city of Mordor, as if it came from the clouds and from another world. My Lord Soren. You are the protector of the half-elves. You are the forerunner in the shadows. You are the keeper of order. Arendelle Royal Palace. Princess Royal's figure appeared on the tower in an instant. She seemed to have just woken up, wearing crystal blue pajamas. Princess Royal looked at the outer islands with dignified eyes. At the last moment of darkness before dawn, a star in the distance suddenly became as dazzling as the moon, illuminating a corner of the sky and sprinkling its brilliance on a certain place. Godhood. Princess Royal slowly closed her eyes. She could hear countless prayers over and over again, echoing in the sky and spreading throughout the material plane. This was the symbol of the birth of a true god. My Lord Soren. Your name will become sacred among the half-elves. You led us through the crisis. You gave us a stable and orderly life. You are a wise ruler. Slaughter will make you stronger. The death of the enemy will spread your brilliance. Your kingdom will bless our souls. When death comes, the servants who serve you will be reborn in your kingdom. North Tower. The legendary most powerful witch, the Eye of the North, had already stood on the astrology platform. She looked at the dazzling stars in the distance. Her pale pupils seemed to have seen everything, including everything that happened in Motor City. A true god was about to be born. Every time the prayers sounded, it was accumulating power for him. When the power of faith was accumulated enough, it was the moment when he lifted the throne to the sky. The prayers were still echoing. Soren's whole body was undergoing drastic changes. Countless power of faith poured into his body, and countless complex data appeared in front of his eyes. The god's template was taking shape, but his power was not enough. He still needed more prayers, more faith, and more divine power. With the arrival of the godhood, his prayers spread throughout the world and into the ears of other gods. At this moment, in countless planes, in the entire multiverse, many high and mighty existences turned their eyes here, to an inconspicuous island in the material plane. A true god was about to be born. From the heavens to the bottomless abyss of the Bator Inferno, gods, demons, devils, evil gods, elemental spirits, demigod liches, and countless powerful beings felt the emergence of a new god. This was the power of a true god. No matter what, it couldn't be hidden because this was a true god recognized by the multiverse. P.S. I will write this paragraph in one breath today. Chapter 504. Rows of data appeared in front of his eyes. God's template transformation. Extracting the power of faith. Connecting to the kingdom of faith. Extracting the power of the kingdom of God. Synchronizing the power of faith. God's template activation. Processing the power of faith. Converting the power of faith. Injecting the power of God. Synchronizing the power of the kingdom of God. Temporarily entering the God's form. Connecting to the kingdom of God. Transforming myself into the God's form. Countless streams of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. If it was before, his brain would have exploded. But now he could easily bear all this and quickly completed the whole process. His body was shining with a strange light. His whole body was automatically suspended in the air. The space around him was assimilated by him. It was as if the power of the law of the place where his body was located was under his control. This was the real power of the gods, and the reason why most of the gods could only stay inside the kingdom of God. The god's form was the embodiment of the power of the law. At this moment, Soren felt an unprecedented power. It was the power to distort the space with a wave of his hand. His figure appeared directly above the temple without any casting action. A huge amount of divine power covered the whole island of Moder. The people who were peeping in the dark couldn't help but tremble. This was the pressure of a true god. It was more shocking than the dragon power of the ancient dragon. God's grace is like the sea. God's power is like a prison. Everything in front of him was under Soren's control. None of the little mice peeping in the dark could escape his sight. At this moment he was a true god. As a god at this moment, it seemed that he could kill any mortal at will. But the precious divine power should not be wasted here. The power provided by tens of thousands of believers' prayers was decreasing, and the divine power connected to the kingdom of God was getting weaker and weaker. Soren must complete the most important thing at this moment. The light of dawn had appeared. But Soren's figure appeared above the temple. He stood in the white light column rising from the statue. His whole body was covered by the light of divinity. Behind him, the darkness was about to disappear, and the light of dawn rose in front of him. At this moment, behind Soren, a blinding ray of light burst forth. The light of the gods illuminated the entire sky, and in that instant, it was as if it was the noon sun, shining in all directions. This was like an important signal. The great priest instantly appeared on the high platform of the temple. A concentrated soul storm spread out and enveloped all the believers in front of him. The power of the soul storm converged into a beam of light that supported Soren's feet. My lord Soren, you will raise the throne that belongs to you. Ascending to the sky. My lord Soren, you will raise the throne that belongs to you. Ascending to the sky. My lord Soren, you will raise the throne that belongs to you. Ascending to the sky. All the prayers were left with this last sentence. The power of the entire temple, the prayers of countless believers, the feedback from the kingdom of God, all the power was gathered on Soren's body. At this moment he was as dazzling as a star. With its prayer words, that even made the space tremble, a part of the soul appeared from Soren's body. All the divine power gathered on this part of the soul. In an instant he was like a star that was lit up by someone. He directly cut through the night sky and rose to the sky. Ascending to the throne. Ascending to the sky. At this most important moment, a huge amount of divine power appeared on the sea temple of Port Moder. Then the sea water in the port suddenly formed a whirlpool. With the violent fluctuations of the sea, a goddess with a trident appeared on the sea. The sea goddess. The sea priests who had been watching Soren's apotheosis indifferently, were shocked beyond words. Then they knelt on the ground one by one. A mass of believers belonging to the sea church knelt on the ground, devoutly welcoming the appearance of the incarnation of the sea goddess. But the sea goddess didn't care about these believers at all. She didn't even look at them. Her figure rose directly into the sky. The incarnation of the sea goddess held the trident and stayed over the city of Moder. She stood in the clouds and watched all this. It was as if she was witnessing Soren's ascension, and it was as if she was deterring some enemies for him. The first incarnation to witness Soren's ascension appeared. A star appeared in the sky. Some kind of light could be seen rising in the distance. For the rest of the world, tonight was just a star that became particularly bright. It was not as shocking as that night when the demigod vampire ascended and dyed the moon red. However, for some other powerful beings in the world, what they saw today was more shocking than what the demigod vampire did. Soren was very low-key. The sacred and spectacular scene of the city of Moder only appeared in the city of Moder. Unless someone used a powerful spell to observe here, people in other places could only see a bright star in the sky. That was all. Because the sacred prayer had caused the space to tremble, any legendary-level existence could hear and feel it. Hence, very soon, many powerful spellcasters turned their attention to this place. A new god had appeared. This seemed to be a chance for them. However, they soon saw a terrible existence that made their hearts skip a beat and their hands tremble. The sea goddess, great divine power. Many people had already heard about the deeds of this evil goddess. Her moodiness, her evil desires, her destructive anger, everything about this evil goddess was as unpredictable as the sea. Although the sea goddess gradually integrated the soft and vast side of the sea, integrated more of the characteristics of the sea into herself, and even wanted to touch the field of life, her own alignment had gradually deviated from chaotic evil to a neutral evil. But there was no doubt that she was still a powerful evil god that many people absolutely did not want to provoke. The sea goddess's eyes were fixed on Soren. But she was also looking at the Amazon rainforest, where the sky seemed to be brewing a storm. It was as if some equally powerful existence had accidentally found a new god next door after taking a nap. Although she had only recently advanced to great divine power, for the sea goddess who had mastered destruction, sea, evil, and other powerful domains, other gods who had already possessed great divine power, did not make her feel the slightest fear. Because she was the incarnation of the sea. Her anger could set off huge waves. It could directly drown any country on the continent. The storm gradually calmed down. The distant Amazon rainforest was restored to its original state, as if the clouds of the storm had never appeared. Soren's soul was rising into the air. All his spiritual will was on the soul that was pulled out, and he had a more important mission to complete. A golden brilliance emerged. Built over the Temple of Wealth in the most prosperous area of the port of Moder, the statue of the Lady of Wealth appeared dazzling brilliance, and then a half-virtual figure stood up. She was wearing a luxurious long dress, and her cloak emitted a bright golden brilliance. Her whole body looked golden, and there was a kind of beauty and luxury that people could not look directly at. The sacred atmosphere spread. Priest Jin's heart thumped, and he quickly led the believers to kneel down, welcoming the incarnation of the goddess of wealth. The figure of the Lady of Wealth rose into the air. She stood on the other side of the city of Moder with a golden scepter in her hand. Her figure stood in the clouds and watched all this, facing the sea goddess from a distance. When the two goddesses looked at each other, there seemed to be sparks of collision in their eyes. The second incarnation to witness Soren's ascension appeared. The goddess of wealth, intermediate divine power. The peeping eyes in the dark suddenly thumped again. The goddess of wealth might not be the most powerful god, but she was definitely the richest god. For such a super golden thigh, anyone who held on to it would benefit a lot. At this time, many people were already thinking of retreating, because this new god's background seemed to be quite strong. One was a great divine power, one was a intermediate divine power, one was a evil and cruel, and one was a quite rich. No matter how you looked at it, it seemed to be a tough one. However, at this time, suddenly a strange chuckle appeared. Faintly, it seemed that a black goddess incarnation appeared. In an instant, both the sea goddess and the Lady of Wealth turned their eyes in that direction, and then there was a trace of shock on their faces. The two goddesses bowed slightly at the same time to express their respect for the mysterious existence. The third incarnation to witness Soren's ascension appeared. The goddess of misfortune, intermediate divine power. Some people who were secretly peeping at Moder almost peed their pants for a moment. Some spellcasters were so scared that their hands trembled, and the crystal balls that were used as props fell to the ground. Some of them were quite powerful. They might not be afraid of the sea goddess or the lady of wealth, but they could never ignore the legendary goddess of misfortune. The power of fate was so elusive that even the gods knew how to maintain respect for the twins of destiny on the surface. The incarnations of the three gods appeared. For anyone who witnessed Soren's ascension, this moment had a profound meaning. The divine brilliance rose. Like a dazzling meteor rising from the ground to the sky, countless people could see this dazzling brilliance, but for ordinary mortals, not many knew what it really represented. P.S. Second update. There is another update today. Chapter 505. What was the most important thing in the investiture ritual? Evolving oneself into the form of a god? Learning how to convert the power of faith into divine power? Learning how to bestow divine spells upon the believers? Or establishing a kingdom that belonged to the gods? No. These were not the most important things. The most important thing for becoming a god was to enter the legendary pantheon, raise the throne high, ascend to the sky. A part of Soren's soul directly turned into a god's incarnation in the form of pure energy. Amidst the prayers of tens of thousands of believers, it rose slowly towards the sky like a bright star. Time and space were no longer a distance. The soul crossed the boundary of the material plane as if it had passed through a solid crystal wall and stood in the bright void of the galaxy. But this was not the most important thing. A sacred door opened in front of Soren. Holy light emerged. The figure of an angel appeared in front of him. Two figures, one black and one white, walked out of the void. A holy angel and an evil fallen angel. They were the oldest group of angels. They were also the most powerful creations of the gods that had survived the long river of time. Now, they were no longer involved in other matters in the universe. They only had one task now, and that was to guard the pantheon, to welcome the new gods. The two ancient angels were silent. They looked at Soren with their eyes, then bowed slightly to show their respect to a true god. Then they opened a door in the void. It was an incomparably magnificent temple that couldn't be described with words. It was the core of the multiverse. It was a place even more mysterious than the legendary Sigil City because only the gods were qualified to step into it. It was the core of the rules of the entire multiverse. Soren nodded slightly and then stepped into the door in front of him. The moment he entered the pantheon, countless knowledge that should be mastered by the gods poured into his mind. This was the power of the most ancient law. No one knew when the pantheon was born, but according to the knowledge of the gods, the pantheon had existed since the birth of the most ancient gods. Just like the oldest memory of the demon Orbis, they woke up from the chaos and descended into the multiverse. The pantheon temple was very quiet. This was an extremely large space. Everything in front of him was covered in a light screen. This was a light screen that not even the god spirits could see through. Divine thrones were placed in the pantheon palace. Soren could see many figures in his line of sight. They were quietly sitting where they were and did not pay any attention to his arrival. These were all the incarnations of the gods. It was also a part of their soul. Any true god would send a part of their soul into the pantheon temple. As long as they did not completely fall, their divine thrones in the pantheon temple would always remain. Not many ancient gods would pay attention to a newly born, minor divine power, at this time. They stayed on their thrones to fight against the coming catastrophe. Nature god system. Elemental god system. Human god system. Elf god system. Dwarf god system. The halfling god system. Drow elven divine system. Order faction. Neutral faction. Chaos faction. Good faction. Evil faction. The distribution of the entire pantheon temple seemed to have a pattern that he did not know. Through his senses, Soren found his position in an instant. At the back of the human god system and the elf god system. In a position close to the left corner of the pantheon temple, there was a divine throne that belonged to Soren. His emblem was engraved on it, and it also showed the divine power that he had. Minor divine power. One of the weakest gods in the entire pantheon temple. There was no divine system. The half-elves only had one god, and they had no clear allies because they could only formally form an alliance after becoming a god. So Soren had an independent position and an independent space, even if he was in the corner of the pantheon temple. However, if he chose to join one of the gods, then his throne would be moved to another space. These separated light screens were actually different spaces, and they were larger than what the eyes could see. The position of the gods was not constant. They maintained the normal operation of the entire multiverse. In fact, These divine thrones would change slightly every 1,000 years or so. Some gods fell and some gods were promoted. But most of the changes appeared at the back of the Pantheon Temple, which belonged to the elemental divine system, natural divine system, and many main gods. There had not been any changes for a long time. The last time there was a drastic change. The divine throne that belonged to the Queen of Spiders appeared directly at the front of the Pantheon Temple. Her divine throne was moved to the row of the main gods of many divine systems. She did not know whether it was intentional or not, but sitting opposite her was her former husband, the ruler of the elf god system, the Lord of the Elves. This couple was really ill-fated. Soren sat on his divine throne. In an instant, the space around him began to expand and turned into a small half-bit wall. It was empty. Because Soren did not have any allies and he did not belong to any divine system. Vaguely. Soren felt 3 gazes and they were expressing goodwill towards him. They were from the sea goddess, the Lady of Wealth, and the Lady of Misfortune. These 3 gods had witnessed his ascension. Naturally, they also noticed Soren as soon as he entered the Pantheon Temple. If it was at any other time, perhaps the appearance of a new god would attract the attention of many gods. But now, the prelude of the Avatar crisis was about to break out. Basically, not many gods would turn their attention to such a trivial matter. Soren sat down. A curtain of light rose around him, and a half-virtual figure of a god appeared in the Pantheon Temple. It looked no different from the other gods sitting on the divine thrones. The power of the law poured into his body. In the dark, Soren seemed to understand some of the power of the rules of the universe, but he seemed to be unable to fully understand it. The ascension was complete. When Soren's soul entered the Pantheon Temple, all the priests could not help but have a slight feeling in their hearts, because they suddenly regained their divine power. Although it was only restored to the 3rd level of divine power, it had a special meaning for them. My Lord Soren had just completed the ascension ceremony, and the divine power he had accumulated was not large enough. But as long as this period of time passed, my Lord Soren would be able to bestow a higher level of divine power. Their power was recovering. Soren slowly opened his eyes, and the stars in the sky representing the half-elves' divine kingdom dimmed again. At this time when the Avatar's crisis was about to break out, Soren could not and did not have the ability to return to the divine kingdom, but he had a connection with the divine kingdom because it represented the divine kingdom produced by the clergy of the half-elves. Although it was very weak and almost crumbling, it still retained a part of its foundation. The divine kingdom gave back a lot of divine power to Soren. Otherwise, it would not be so easy for him to raise his divine throne to the sky. The ascension ceremony was completed. The figure of the goddess of misfortune gradually disappeared in the sky, leaving only a faint laughter. The goddess of wealth looked at Soren. She nodded slightly to Soren, and then turned into golden light and dissipated. This god with middle-grade divine power was not very powerful. At this time when the Avatar crisis was about to come, she did not want to waste too much of her divine power. The only one left in the sky was the goddess of sea. The evil goddess smiled faintly at Soren, then raised her trident and pointed at the sea temple. The huge amount of divine power that had been gathered since the establishment of Port Mordor ran wildly, and even drew power from some places in the sea. She looked down at everything in front of her and said in a majestic voice, "This city will have 3 years of harvest." Oracle. Holy words. The voice full of holiness echoed over the city of Mordor. Finally, a huge burst of divine power broke out, and even the surrounding space trembled all the way to the depths of the sea. The figure of the goddess of sea slowly disappeared. Soren's figure stayed in the air, bowing slightly towards the place where she disappeared, expressing his respect and gratitude. This was the kindness of the gods. The goddess of sea was expressing her kindness, telling Soren that she was more generous than the other 2 goddesses and more willing to cooperate with him. Maybe it was because Soren had expanded her faith, or maybe it was because Soren had the territory of pirates. Or maybe they both belonged to the evil camp. It was difficult to guess the thoughts of the gods, but her behavior was worthy of respect and gratitude. Soren's figure slowly descended. The ascension ceremony had now reached the last step. The figure of the high priest appeared in front of the statue. She knelt down to Soren, who was standing in front of the statue, humbly expressing her respect and love. Soren gently put his hand on her head, and then a powerful divine power broke out. Then he took out a scepter that symbolized the highest power of the half-elf church, poured his own divine power into it, and finally handed it to the high priest. The power of the king. From now on, the high priest was the supreme ruler of the half-elf church. As a god, Soren would gradually move behind the scenes. He needed to hand over many things to his spokesperson in the mortal world because this was the unspoken rule of the gods. Soren's figure gradually disappeared. The statue was shrouded in holy light, as if he was watching everything in front of him. In front of the temple, the high priest came out with a solemn face. She solemnly raised the scepter and said, "The glory of our Lord will be spread by us. Glory to our Lord. And we will finally be reborn in the Holy Kingdom." Cheers resounded through the heavens and earth. In order to celebrate the ascension of our Lord Soren, the city of Mordor would hold a joyous celebration for 7 days. The city also had its first festival. Chapter 506. What are you worried about? Fallen Witch Kalina's figure appeared outside the door. She looked at her daughter in front of her and said slowly, "Are you afraid that he will change after he becomes a god?" Gloria turned and glanced at her mother. She had always been noble and elegant, but at this moment she looked a little flustered. She did not answer her mother's question but clenched the staff in her hand. What made her feel uneasy was not only the rumors about the gods, but also the gap between her and Soren. She liked her current life very much. It was a quiet and peaceful life with no loss of sweetness and happiness. She was worried that all this would change because of the apotheosis. When she first met Soren, he was just an inconspicuous little thief. But now, in such a short time, he had become a pirate king who ruled a vast sea, had tens of thousands of troops, and was the only master of Mordor. Now he was a powerful god, the protector of the half-elves. Even Gloria's status in the Witch Council had been continuously raised because of Soren. She had become a manager second only to the Eye of the North. All of this was because she was the mistress of Mordor and the only woman Soren could stand on the stage. Sometimes she would also wonder what was chasing after him that made Soren work so hard again and again. But she also knew that Soren did not want to say it, so she could only stand behind him silently and support him as much as possible. Gloria also had her own pride in her heart. Now she was a legendary spellcaster. It could be said that she was the most talented witch in the north for hundreds of years. But all of this seemed to be far behind Soren. She was a little uneasy. She did not know where the future would lead, and she was even more worried that the gap between her and Soren would get bigger and bigger. A high and mighty god. Although many spellcasters were known to have the power of gods, they also knew that compared with the real gods, the gap as a mortal was still quite huge. She would not say all this because she was Gloria, the most dazzling pearl in the north. But she couldn't hide it from her mother. Perhaps it was because they were connected by flesh and blood, or perhaps it was because the two of them had a similar feeling. "He's the most determined man I've ever met." Karina, the fallen witch, came to her daughter's side. She reached out and held Gloria's hand and said slowly, "Such a man. It was impossible for him to lose himself because of the power of a god. Although sometimes I don't know what he's afraid of, or what he's preparing for, he knows that he might be able to see further than us." At this point, Fallen Witch silently added in her heart, to be able to endure under such circumstances. If it wasn't for the fact that she could see her daughter's beautiful face every morning, she would sometimes wonder if Soren wasn't interested in women at all. The existence of gods was rather special. Mortals had a limited understanding of the gods. As wizards, they had also studied the gods. For example, the gods also had desires. Many of the gods even liked pleasure. The gods would also reproduce, but sometimes they would give birth to sins. A lot of research on the gods had been carried out by the wizard organizations for many years. One of the interesting things was that many gods might have some kind of mental distortion due to a change in perspective or other reasons. For example, the god of murder almost killed himself because of the interference of divine power, divinity, and so on. Soren had always insisted on eliminating other consciousnesses in divinity, and using his own will as the core to integrate the power, because he was also worried that he would be affected by some divine power. It was a very complicated thing. But the most fundamental thing was the collision of wills. Only a will as strong as steel could not be affected by any external factors. Soren's figure appeared in the room. When he saw Fallen Witch Karina was also here, he couldn't help but be a little startled and then nodded slightly. "Is it over?" Fallen Witch looked at Soren with a smile. She didn't know why, but her smile seemed a little awkward. Gloria also turned around and looked at Soren with some emotions. After feeling that there was not much change in Soren, she was a little relieved. Whether it was on the surface or mutual induction, Soren didn't change much. The biggest change was his eyes, which were like a deep sea of stars, making people feel as if they were trapped in it. This was the gaze of divinity. Unless deliberately concealed, it was a special ability. Soren seemed to understand what they were worried about. He shook his head and smiled. It's not like what you think. The divinity I have has erased the original will, and it won't have any effect on me. But after the integration of divinity, there are some restrictions. Divinity was a job for gods. In this job you could occasionally be lazy, but if you didn't do it at all you had to pay the price. The sky above Motor City was shrouded in divine power. Soren's perception had been expanded many times, and his ability, telepathy 10 feet, had now been upgraded to telepathy 100 feet. If there were believers praying in his name he could feel it, but he had to consume divine power to know everything. At this moment, his divine template had been formed. This was another template. Divine name, God of Half-Elves, Soren. Divine system, none. Level, minor divine power. Holy emblem, Shadow Watcher. Residential area, material plane. Alignment, lawful evil. Clergy, half-elves rogues. Domain, half-elves rogues pirates. Believers, half-elves pirates rogues adventurers etc. Priest alignment, neutral good, lawful evil, neutral evil. Note, the chaotic alignment is automatically rejected. Favorite weapon, curved sword. The divine template looked simple. But in fact it contained quite a lot of meaning, and many aspects represented the core ability of a god. Although Soren was a half-elves, he had a rogue clergy, so his believers were wider, including half-elves, pirates, rogues, adventurers and so on. The easiest believers to attract were half-elves. His faith was spread among half-elves and would not be affected. A believer in the chaotic alignment could believe in the lawful alignment. But it was difficult for a priest of the chaotic alignment to become a priest of the lawful alignment. In the end, the priest could only change his alignment to the alignment needed by the god. The alignments that Soren gave to the priests were neutral good, lawful evil and neutral evil. Don't ask him why he could have a neutral good priest, because Soren himself didn't quite understand. He was just a newly born god, and there were many things that he didn't fully understand. However, he could accept the priests of the neutral good alignment. Maybe it was related to the environment of Motor City. At least Motor City was not very evil. The strict rule was just to deal with the upcoming Avatar crisis. In this case, it was not surprising that the situation of Motor City accepted the priests of the neutral good. As for the lawful good alignment, it was unlikely. Finally, it was Soren's weapon. The gods had a special ability. They could give the weapon they were best at to their believers and priests as a talent. That was to say, they could automatically learn the basic skills of using curved swords in combat. In the future, as long as they were Soren's priests, they could get extra bonus effects when they mastered the curved swords in combat. How much they could understand still depended on their personal ability. This was the basic ability of the divine template. And the most important thing was that it could help Soren deal with the prayers of the believers, including responding to the connection of devout believers, and automatically giving divine spells to the priests who believed in him. It was like a huge information processor. Soren would automatically receive all the prayers and convert the power of faith. If something important happened, he could get extra information. For example, some believers found the conspiracy of the gods of the enemy alignment and wanted to tell him through prayers for guidance. Or a new priest was born and needed the first divine spell response from him, and so on. Soren could know these more important things first and deal with them in time. As for the ordinary daily prayers, the divine template would automatically filter them for him. He had to say. With this ability, he felt that the tasks after becoming a god were much simpler. At least he didn't have to do everything himself. Chapter 507. A week passed in the blink of an eye. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. The civilians began to live a busy but stable and peaceful life. The priests were busy perfecting the doctrine, and the daily prayer schedule was full. After restoring some of the low-level divine powers, the operation of the church was completely normal. Soren did not carry out drastic reforms in the church system like Mordor City. Because the reform of Mordor City was only his personal problem, but if the church changed too much, it was very likely to attract the attention of other gods. At present, the operation system of the church was similar to that of other gods. The high priest could basically deal with many things properly. His divine power was increasing little by little. Soren absorbed the feedback power from the kingdom of God, which allowed him to gain nearly 100 divine power points after entering the pantheon. Without a doubt, these divine power points were used to master the ability of form change. The speed of gathering divine power was very slow. With the current accumulation of believers, Soren could only get less than one divine power point every day. This divine power was barely enough to improve his power, but if he wanted to use it to expand the half-bit wall and transform the kingdom of God, it would become quite insufficient. Because divine power still needed to be consumed, giving divine powers to priests was the biggest expenditure of divine power. In the era of the Avatar crisis, even gods with great divine power had to control the number of priests who gave divine powers. Therefore, Soren could only give it to devout priests at present, and then control the level of the divine power. According to Soren's calculation, with the current scale of the church, he could accumulate about 300 divine power points in a year, which was enough for him to upgrade to minor divine power. But if he wanted to reopen the half-bit wall in the kingdom of God, it was completely not enough. The investiture was completed. Soren naturally wanted to open up a small half-bit wall of his own. In other words, this was a different dimension storage space, but he found that the consumption of divine power was quite serious when he just opened it up a little. A space of less than 100 cubic meters consumed nearly 10 divine power points. This made Soren give up the idea of relying solely on divine power to open up the half-bit wall because the energy consumption was too great. Maybe he could only wait until he deciphered the knowledge of the arcane empire and opened up the space with the support of the elemental plane. Gloria was studying the elemental pool. Almost all half-planes would open a channel and expand with the help of the elemental plane. The apotheosized ceremony ended. Everything gradually returned to the right track. Soren's planned military parade was in full swing, and Treasure Island also sent back the first batch of trophies. Many things had happened during this period of time. Autumnfall City seemed to be temporarily stiff. Eugene and the Earthwalker were fighting, and neither side had the upper hand. It was unlikely for the half-elves to recover their lost land. The wife of the Duke of Red Dragon of the Principality of Rossard has been frequently mobilizing her troops. Intelligence reports say that she is showing signs of war with her neighbors. The rest of the news wasn't too important. Currently, Soren was most concerned about the Principality of Rossard. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife chose to declare war on a neighboring country at this time, and he could not help but smell a hint of conspiracy. Things were definitely not that simple. As the time approached the end of June, the atmosphere of turmoil became more and more intense. After Soren stabilized the situation of the church, he was finally able to free up his hands to do some other things. After the apotheosized ceremony, he must hide his strength for a while. At least before the official start of the Avatar crisis, Soren must keep a low profile. When the Avatar crisis completely broke out, and the other gods also walked in the world in the form of saints, he would not be so eye-catching at that time. Therefore he would stay in Mordor City for the rest of the time. In the study, Soren took a quill pen and recorded on the file. There were only 6 months left before the Avatar crisis completely broke out. These 6 months would be his last chance to accumulate his strength. Once the 6 months were over, even if the various gods were to fight, there would be no chance for him to build up his foundation. The first thing. Of course, the upcoming military parade was to show his strength to many forces. If he was strong enough, he could deter the enemies in the dark. The second thing. It was to pacify the indigenous people near the island of Mordor. Soren was going to take down the part of the island that was inlaid with the island, and eventually expand his territory by about 2 times. A long time ago he had sent people to explore the nearby indigenous tribes. This process could not be rushed to avoid the hostility of the Church of the Lord of Storms, and too alarming the female warriors of the Amazon. Soren intended to complete it in half a year, and eventually completely take over the island of Mordor and Treasure Island. The souls of these indigenous people should also be able to provide Soren with about 20 points of divinity, and about 10 points of divinity. This was the fastest way to increase his strength in addition to challenging other gods. The third thing. It was to develop the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane. After such a long time, Gloria and the Fallen which were about to find the key to crack the half-bit wall of the Wizard Tower. As long as they broke the half-bit wall, they could enter the interior of the Wizard Tower. Soren now had the form of a saint, and it was much easier to explore the Wizard Tower left from the Arcane Empire, so he would cooperate with them to take down the Wizard Tower. These were the 3 things that were on the table. If he wanted to do these things well, Soren must stay in Mordor. However, in his secret plan, there was another important thing that needed to be done. That was to go to the bottomless abyss. In a quiet room, Soren glanced at Lulu, who was sleeping at the foot of the bed. The little cat girl curled up into a ball, and crystal saliva flowed out of the corner of her mouth. Soren couldn't help but have a gentle smile on his face. He gently waved his hand and a soft blanket flew over, and then carefully covered the cat girl's body. Since Vivian fell asleep, she rarely left here. She had been guarding by her side loyally, which made Soren have a good impression of her. Vivian was still asleep. Her strength was getting stronger day by day, and Soren's worry was also getting bigger day by day. There weren't many Sons of Fear left. Now Vivian's strength was probably close to the advanced legendary realm, which meant that most of the power of fear had been integrated into her body. This power didn't belong to Vivian. Unlike Soren, who relied on his own killing to get his power, Vivian's power came entirely from fear. Now the breath of the bottomless abyss on her was getting more and more serious. Soren was worried that she would be dragged into the bottomless abyss, or even let fear resurrect directly in her body. He had to do something. The body of fear was in the deepest part of the bottomless abyss, in a place called the Throne of Fear. The core of fear's soul was sealed there. The most powerful demigod demon of the bottomless abyss was stationed there. Only by destroying the Throne of Fear, this terrifying demon god would die completely, and Vivian could safely inherit the divine title of Fear. However, even with Soren's current strength, it was very difficult to destroy the Throne of Fear, because it was inside Fear's kingdom. If the power of fear was further gathered, the most likely thing that would happen was that Vivian would be forcefully dragged into Fear's kingdom. Soren had to do something in advance. As a newly born god, it was quite dangerous for Soren to go to the bottomless abyss alone. It was even more dangerous than before he became a god. This was because the demon lord would covet his divinity. The body of a god was like a torch. No matter how Soren hid, he would be discovered by the powerful demon lord. The laws of the bottomless abyss were extremely chaotic. Many demon lords were naturally hostile to him, a god of the lawful evil faction. Vivian's fate could not be changed. Between her and fear, only one of them could survive. In order to protect Vivian, Soren might even have to descend his kingdom into the bottomless abyss in the future. This was because other demon gods also coveted the power of fear. Soren could not enter the bottomless abyss openly. Although this extremely chaotic place could give birth to a realm of order, a kind succubus, or even a child of hell, who was looking for salvation, it was still shrouded in chaos. Soren had enemies everywhere in the bottomless abyss. The only thing he could do now was to set up a trap in the invincible abyss, which was his own chess piece. In other words, it was called building one path in the open but building another in the dark. When everyone thought that he was quietly accumulating strength in Motor City, he had already reached into the bottomless abyss and was ready to bury his own chess piece. Chapter 508. The Bottomless Abyss. It was the true embodiment of the law of chaos. It was a place where anything could happen because it was too chaotic. Benevolent demons, lords of order, holy samurai from hell, children of hell in search of salvation, and so on had appeared here before. Almost everything that could possibly happen had happened here before, because the truest truth of chaos was that anything was possible. However, as the embodiment of the law of chaos, the bottomless abyss belonged to chaotic evil. Anyone from the Order faction who came into contact with a demon would have their charisma reduced by 2 points. If they were from the good faction, they would have another 2 points of charisma reduced. This was the law of the abyss. The bottomless abyss would not directly suppress your strength, but it would make you enemies on all sides. Note, the charisma reduction was only on the surface. More adventurers found that there was an additional friendliness reduction. Soren was from the lawful evil faction. So if he appeared in the bottomless abyss, all demons who saw him or heard of him would have a 2 points of charisma reduction due to the law of the abyss. Simply put, why do I feel so annoyed when I see this guy? I really want to fight with him. If someone from the good faction appeared in the bottomless abyss, they should prepare to fight all the way. Because all demons would treat you as a mortal enemy. No one knew how many levels there were in the bottomless abyss. Chaos was infinite. As long as one's strength reached a certain level, one could even create a half-plane. The difference between a half-plane and the first level of the bottomless abyss was not as big as one would think. Because of the gap between the planes, no one had really explored the deepest part of the bottomless abyss. But currently, people knew that there were more than 800 planes of the abyss. Even the Bator Inferno used to be a part of the bottomless abyss. Because in a very long time ago, the Lord of the Nine Hells, Asmodeus, used his powerful divine power to cut the bottomless abyss. He forcefully cut out 9 planes of the bottomless abyss and transformed them into the Bator Inferno of today. The power of this Lord of the Devils was unfathomable. He even changed the laws of these planes and recast them into the Bator Inferno of today. It was the paradise of the evil faction. The predecessor of the Abyss Blood War was the war between the Order gods and the origin of chaos. The fall of Asmodeus and the replacement of the demons of Orbis by the demons of Tana led to the end of this ancient war and thus turned into the current Abyss Blood War, an endless war between the demons of Order evil and the demons of Chaos evil. The main battlefield of the Abyss Bloody War was on the first level. Sometimes it was on the first level of the Bottomless Abyss, and sometimes it was on the first level of the Bator Inferno. The exact location would depend on how both sides were fighting, whether the Devil Legion was large enough, and whether the Devil Legion had truly sent out their elite troops. Because if the two sides really fought, it would be a terrifying planar war. The bloody war in the Abyss had never truly stopped. The first layer of the bottomless abyss, the 10,000 Abyss plane. In the whistling wind, a figure covered in a cloak appeared here. He seemed to have come here from another plane and disappeared as soon as he arrived. A row of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Interplanar teleportation complete. Enter the bottomless abyss. Interdimensional travel was completed. You've obtained a small amount of planar traveler information. The data is automatically operating. Beginning to calculate the characteristics of the current plane. A stream of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes, and then the information of the first level of the abyss appeared in front of him. The first level of the abyss, 10,000 Abyss plane. Normal gravity, the highest level of the abyss, the 10,000 Abyss plane, and many other levels have normal gravity characteristics, but some other levels of the abyss may include a variety of possible different gravity characteristics. Normal time. The speed of time passing in the abyss is the same as in the material world. However, rumors have always claimed that there is a level where time passes in reverse due to relative aging. Although the reverse flow of time is very strange, but a visitor may rejuvenate or even turn into nothingness. Remark, it is said that traces of the time dragon have appeared. Infinite space. The number of levels of the abyss is always infinite, although its well-known kingdom is limited. Divine form. The physical body must be at least as powerful as a low-grade god to change the characteristics of the abyss. Weaker creatures will find that the abyss is no different from the material world, changeable characteristics. This is because the plane can be changed by magic and physical effects. Remark, it is as difficult to interfere with the laws of the abyss as it is in the material world. Mixed elemental and energy characteristics. This characteristic is different from level to level. From the perspective of the abyss as a whole, no single elemental or energy can continue to dominate, although there may be a dominant elemental or energy in certain levels, or two or more mixed characteristics. Weak chaotic tendencies and weak evil tendencies. Lawful characters will suffer a penalty of -2 on all charity-based checks in the abyss. Good characters will suffer the same penalty. Lawful characters will suffer a penalty of -4 on all charity-based checks. The characteristics of the abyss appeared in front of Soren's eyes. In a place like the abyss, it would be helpful to understand the characteristics of the plane first, because sometimes the difference in gravity could catch you off guard. Sand and wind filled the sky. Not far from where Soren appeared, there was a tattered and weathered notice board with the following words written on it: "This is an endless and suffocating place of horror. This is a place of extremely harsh environment and life is extremely dangerous. This is a place of endless killing without morals or ethics." The words at the back had already disappeared. After a long time, this was the only thing that was left behind. Every adventurer who entered the abyss through the teleportation portal could see it. Soren turned around and left. His destination was in another direction, where he had buried a chess piece in the bottomless abyss. Abyss Blood Pool. This was a gloomy, terrifying, and bloody place. Even the ground here was strangely dark red. Visible to the naked eye, there were large and small insects everywhere. These insects looked very ferocious, and their terrifying numbers made one's scalp tingle. The endless slaughter began the moment it was born. The abyssal worm was the most basic structure of the bottomless abyss. Many souls from the multiverse descended into the bottomless abyss. Unless they were picked by some powerful demons, they could only reincarnate in this plane through the abyssal blood pool. The abyss worm was their most basic form. They were the weakest creatures, and they needed to kill each other to evolve into a real demon. There were many souls in this world. However, high-quality souls were always scarce because the gods, demons, and devils were fighting for them. Now, even the chaotic demons knew that they had to snatch the best souls first, which could greatly enhance their strength. Basically, the souls that were transformed through the Abyss blood pool were not very good demon cannon fodder. The soul of a class and the soul of an ordinary person. The soul of a human and the soul of a kobold. The soul of a goblin and the soul of a beast. The quality of these souls was not equal. The soul of an ordinary person was enough to attract the attention of devils, but the soul of a goblin or kobold might be disregarded by low-level devils. This was because humans needed a long time to grow, but goblins and kobolds could give birth to a large nest in one spring. Not many people were interested in these low-quality souls. Some directly flowed into the unknown lands along the river Styx, and some were attracted by the Abyss blood pool and reincarnated into the lowest level of Abyss worms. This was the source of the huge army of cannon fodder in the Abyss. This was also the first step of Soren's next plan, because he had to find a way to eliminate some of the rejection of the law of the Abyss. These Abyss worms that were reincarnated as the foundation of the Abyss would be Soren's first experiment. Chapter 509. It was difficult to see high-grade demons in the abyssal blood pool. Basically, as long as the abyssal worms that were born here reached the edge of evolution, they would automatically leave here to look for opportunities to become stronger. Most of the surviving abyssal worms would evolve into Dretch. Occasionally, some abyssal worms could evolve because of adventures. Only a small number of abyssal worms would retain their original appearance and further improve their strength. Any demon could gradually become stronger. The Abyss never lacked demons that hated new forms and refused to evolve. For example, the abyssal blood pool in front of them. There was a powerful demigod demon here, the Mother of Worms. Very few demons were willing to retain the original form of the abyssal worms to improve their strength. However, the Abyss was originally an extremely chaotic place, so anything could happen here. The Mother of Worms was an accident within an accident. The abyssal worms could strengthen themselves through fighting and devouring the blood of high-grade demons. In Soren's way of saying, if the abyssal worm chose to only level up but not evolve, it would retain the basic form of the abyssal worm and become bigger little by little. When it reached the legendary level, the abyssal worm would look about the size of a dragon. Because it gave up other abilities, the legendary abyssal worms had amazing psionic abilities and terrible acid-spitting ability. Even the dragon scales of a pure-blooded dragon could be looked down upon by the acid they spat out. An abyssal worm that could grow to such a size was a very dangerous creature even in the Abyss. Even high-grade demons would not easily provoke it. Not to mention that the abyssal worm's demon bloodline was not high enough, and many powerful beings were not interested in it. If it continued to maintain this form, the abyssal worm would continue to grow and eventually become the Mother of Worms. A terrifying monster with a monster level of 25 or above. Because of its original form of the abyssal worm, the movement speed of the Mother of Worms was quite slow, so it rarely left the vicinity of its nest. The Mother of Worms liked to build its nest near the abyssal blood pool and used the energy of the blood pool as food. It was responsible for guarding the abyssal blood pool and rarely left here. The Mother of Worms would not easily attack demons. However, other outsiders would anger it, and high-grade demons were not allowed to easily set foot here. If a Dretch wanted to sneak back and rely on killing the abyssal worms to improve their strength, then they would be mercilessly attacked by the Mother of Worms. The responsibility of the Mother of Worms was to maintain the abyssal blood pool and ensure that the order of reincarnation here could continue. Shadow hide. Soren's figure disappeared into the darkness. In front of him there were countless abyssal worms. Was a monster of abyssal worms. They had no other abilities except to spit acid. They might be able to deal with mortals, but in the bottomless abyss, they belonged to the lowest level and could be accidentally trampled to death. The Mother of Worms' huge body was to appear in the abyssal blood abyssal worm. It looked like a giant worm with a length of more than 30 meters. It looked round, but there was a bloody mouth in front of it. To Sal's abyssal worm pool 2. For abyssal blood pool worm. Blood abyss blood. Of SSSSSSSSSS blood of blood worms 4. SSSSSSSSSSSSSS. It. The huge worm was moving slowly. Every day it would patrol its territory. This seemed to be a special hobby of demons. From the demon lords to the low-grade demons, they all liked to patrol their territories. They valued their territories very much. Maybe because this was the Abyss, the competition for any territory was quite fierce. Time passed little by little. Soren was waiting for an opportunity. The Mother of Worms had a telepathic range of 100 meters. As long as it was more than 100 meters away, it was almost impossible for it to find Soren. In front of him were piles of worms fighting. Even for the lowest creatures, the competition between demons was quite fierce. The mother of worms almost did not care about this. It just did not let others get close. On the ground where the mother of worms crawled, it would leave dark green mucus. Even the soil was corroded. Occasionally, abyssal worms touched the mucus. Generally, there were only two results. One was to be corroded into rotten meat, and the other was to suddenly evolve and mutate from the abyssal worm +1 form to the abyssal worm +2 form. Survival of the fittest. Those who could resist the mucus of the mother of worms could become stronger. They could devour the excrement of the mother of worms and become low-grade demons at the fastest speed. The distance was finally enough. Soren quickly came to the side of the abyssal blood pool. This was a polluted power, not pure blood. There was the water of the Styx in it. As a god, Soren felt it almost immediately. Demons reincarnated through the abyssal blood pool would almost forget the memory of their previous life, whether they were human or kobold. A newborn abyssal worm crawled out of the blood pool. Soren determined his goal and waved his hand to fix it in place. Then a huge will came and crushed its newborn consciousness. It had become an idiot, something similar to a vegetable. Only a living shell was left. Divine power infusion. Soren injected a weak divine power into the body of the abyssal worm. Then the abyssal worm in front of him began to change violently, and a faint shadow of a soul appeared. The soul of a kobold. The next moment, with the sound of an explosion, the newborn abyssal worm directly turned into meat paste. It failed. Soren's face was calm and did not seem to be discouraged. The power of a god was too great. Even the weakest divine power was not something the abyssal worm could bear. He could not transform it. After all, the abyssal worm was not a mutant killer whale. Unless he was willing to give it divinity, it could not bear his power. But precious divinity could not be given casually, and his divinity now directly carried the breath of a god. If he met a high-grade demon in the future, it would be easy to find this. That's right. Soren was going to create a body. For a god, this ability, similar to an avatar, was not difficult. Many avatars used by gods to walk in the mortal world were created by similar means. Although the power of a god's avatar could never exceed the power of the body, it had special uses in many cases. What Soren wanted was not as simple as a god's avatar. Otherwise, he could directly create one like the mutant killer whale and directly send his will to it when needed. What Soren needed was another identity. One that no god knew and no god could detect. It seemed to have nothing to do with him at all. It was completely a tool of the demons born in the bottomless abyss. The body of a newborn demon. But it could be used as a carrier of his will. This carrier must completely rely on the power of the abyssal demon to allow Soren to complete the next step of his plan. The bottomless abyss was very resistant to outsiders. Even when the Queen of Spiders descended her kingdom to the bottomless abyss, she was attacked by many demon lords. So if a new god wanted to occupy a piece of the abyss and was an enemy of the Order faction, it was easy to become the target of the demon lords. Soren planned to cultivate a powerful demon body. This demon body would be the key to his future descent of his kingdom to the bottomless abyss. In order to make the plan foolproof, he could not create it as a god like the mutant killer whale. He had to eliminate the hostility of the bottomless abyss to him. So Soren planned to do a bold experiment. Boom. The abyssal worm in front of him exploded again. A trace of disappointment appeared on Soren's face. These souls were too weak and could not withstand his will, let alone his power. Powerful demons had their own soul imprints. If he forcibly occupied them, it would be easy for him to be discovered. Soren needed a more subtle way. In the end, he turned his gaze to the blood pool in front of him. Soren's expression showed a trace of hesitation because he was a little worried about the power of the Styx's water. But in the end, he gritted his teeth and slowly entered it. This was a gamble. Chapter 5:10. The light of the setting sun shone on the city of Mordor. The figure of the high priest came out of the temple. After a busy day, she returned to her residence in the evening. But when she passed by Soren's mansion, the high priest's face suddenly changed, and she disappeared in an instant. The next moment she appeared outside Soren's room. After hesitating for a moment, she decisively opened the door. "Master?" The high priest quickly entered the room and looked at Soren, who had his back to her, and said in a deep voice, "What's the matter? What happened? Why does Master look so weak?" As one of Soren's voters, the high priest was keenly aware of the changes in his body. Soren was very, very weak, and it could even be said that he was unprecedentedly weak. What could have made a god so weak? Could it be that Master had secretly fought with some powerful gods? But once the gods fought, it would be a full-scale war. As the ruler of the half-elf church, she should know something. Nothing. Soren slowly turned around. His face was slightly pale and tired. He looked very weak. This was not physical weakness but the weakness of his soul. He looked at the high priest in front of him and slowly said, "I need to rest for half a month. For the next period of time, everything in the church will be handed over to you. The Council Hall of Mordor will fully cooperate with your actions. I'm afraid you will also need to fully prepare for the military parade." The high priest heard this and bowed slightly. There was a trace of worry on her face. She slowly said, "Understood, my lord." She opened her mouth to ask something but in the end she didn't ask. As a servant of the gods, although she was the supreme ruler of the half-elf church, she couldn't easily ask Soren. Because if she knew something, Soren wouldn't deliberately hide it from her. The gods had their own secrets. As a servant of Soren, she just needed to do her own thing. The high priest figure retreated. Soren slowly came to the window, raised his hand, looked at his palm and murmured, "My soul is weak. I don't know if I can get the result I want by paying such a huge price." The sun was setting. The afterglow that shrouded Mordor city disappeared, and people returned home to prepare dinner. Suddenly, the whole city of Mordor shook as if there was an earthquake. Even Soren felt the ground shaking. However, all of this only lasted for a very short time. The next moment, Gloria's voice rang out in Soren's mind. She said excitedly, "It's open. It was finally opened. We have opened the semi-plane of the Sorcerer Tower." Soren was shocked. He had just sat down when he involuntarily stood up and muttered, "Have you finally cracked it?" It had been almost half a year. "I finally solved the first secret of the Adept Tower." It had been more than half a year. Since Gloria came to the Outer Islands, they had been looking for the key to cracking the secret of the Sorcerer Tower. Now they had finally opened the semi-plane passage of the Sorcerer Tower. As long as they could enter the semi-plane, they could take down the Sorcerer Tower. This was very important for Soren's future because the Sorcerer Tower during the Arcane Empire had the ability to fight against the incarnations of the gods. And the knowledge contained in it could help Soren face all the challenges in the future. The first layer of the Abyss Plane near the Abyss Blood Pool. The huge body of the Mother of Worms had returned to the vicinity of the Abyss Blood Pool. After spending half a day patrolling its territory, it lay motionless on the ground. The Abyss Worm in front of it could not attract its attention at all. After it completed its daily task, it began to devour the power of the blood pool. The water of the Styx River seriously affected its intelligence. It often forgot what happened yesterday, but this was not important to it because it only needed to move its huge body around every day. It rarely paid attention to other things. Although the Mother of Worms had a creature level of more than 25, its intelligence was even lower than the low-level Dretch. It had very few memories in its long life, but it still instinctively remembered its task. A slight noise attracted the attention of the Mother of Worms. It turned its huge body and stopped devouring the energy of the blood pool. In front of it, there was a mass of twisted flesh, which looked like a dark red cocoon. This was the Abyss Worm that was about to evolve. Under normal circumstances, the Abyss Worms that had the ability to evolve would transform at dusk. The timing of this Abyss Worm's evolution seemed to be a bit different. But the Mother of Worms did not care about this. It just used its powerful psionic arcana to send a message, "Get out of here. Go fight. Go fight. Stay. Die. Die." The Dretch could not stay here. Because this was not fair to other Abyss Worms. An adult man could kill the Abyss Worms, but it was basically impossible to defeat the Dretch that was born with 2 challenge levels. To deal with this low-level demon, a team of adventurers with a profession level of about 2 was needed. Even if its challenge difficulty was only level D. The newborn Dretch looked less than a meter tall, but as a demon, it was born with strength far beyond that of ordinary people. They were born with the ability to see things and had good resistance to electric shock, poison, acid, cold, and fire. And they also automatically understood the language of the Abyss and mastered the ability of telepathy. If it were not for the low perception attribute and could only communicate with telepathy, this seemingly weak demon would be even more difficult to deal with. The newly born Dretch was still very weak. Many of its abilities had not been fully awakened. As its level increased, it could also master spell-like abilities such as Fear, Stinky Cloud, Summon Demon, and so on. Leave here. The Mother of Worms once again sent out a telepathic message. If the Dretch in front of it did not leave, it was going to crush this little thing. In its long life, it had encountered fools that had evolved into Dretch but did not want to leave. They wanted to rely on slaughtering the abyss worms to further accumulate power. These fools who only dared to bully the weak were all eaten by it. The Dretch finally began to move. It seemed a little clumsy, as if it was not used to its current body. This made the simple brain of the mother of worms think of stupidity. This was obviously a Dretch with a stunted brain, which was why it stood there for a while. Such an idiot would soon die outside, and the mother of worms was not interested in continuing to pay attention to it. About a minute later, the Dretch finally returned to normal. Its small body walked out flexibly and soon disappeared into the plain. In front of it was the barren scarlet plain. The first challenge of becoming a demon was that the newborn Dretch would hunt each other on this plane in order to gain power and also to get food. Only the Dretch that could pass through this plane could be considered to have truly entered the ranks of demons. They also had the qualifications to be cannon fodder. Chapter 5:11. Every day in the city of Mordor was a new day. Although the earthquake yesterday evening made many people a little worried, they returned to their original lives the next day. In the residential area in the south of Mordor, men began to take tools and prepare for work, while women began to clean the rooms and deal with housework. As the first tense period passed, the half-elves with skills quickly reached the standard of living of ordinary people. In this way, the women who were the labor force at the beginning were liberated. Except for some sewing work, all the manual labor had been done by men and slaves. Half-elves were born with dexterity. Although many of the daily necessities they made did not meet the standards of the elves, they were much more exquisite than those produced by humans. It seemed that Mordor would soon have a profitable product. The south coast area was very rich. The prosperous trade allowed many coastal residents to enter a well-off life. With surplus food in hand, they naturally had more pursuits for basic necessities. The things made by half-elves were definitely much more exquisite than those made by humans. Stephen walked leisurely towards the barracks. Because he brought his lover to Mordor City, he had now moved to his own room. The woman was very diligent. As soon as she moved here, she tidied up some things neatly. With a woman to warm the bed at night, he naturally did not want to live in a barracks full of men. Now he was already a rich class in Mordor. Because he had accumulated a lot of military merits, Stephen had exchanged some land, but it was still too expensive to cultivate. Half of his land was still wasteland. He was going to hire people to cultivate it in the second half of the year. His lover brought a few children over. Stephen had been wandering the sea all his life. Now that he was 30 years old, his mentality was much calmer. He was going to spend some money to let these children learn a craft. The blacksmith shop still needed apprentices. With his identity, it was not a problem to arrange an apprentice. If they learned a craft in the future, a qualified blacksmith would be able to settle down. The other children also had their own way out. The stupid one could learn to farm. In the future, the land outside the city could be handed over to him to manage. The smart and talented one could be considered to be a professional. After a few years, he would also become a guard of Mordor. Stephen wanted a child of his own, so in order to avoid too many disputes in the future, he prepared a way for each of them in advance. If they did not work hard enough, then they were not qualified to complain. In front of him was the garrison. Stephen quickly put on a serious expression, tidied up his clothes, and quickly walked into the meeting hall. Very soon, there was an order that the garrison of Mordor City would be doubled. Although he didn't know the reason, he just needed to complete the task seriously. The most important thing in Mordor City was to stick to one's job. Only in this way could one be promoted. Shadow Plane. Soren stared at the dimensional crack in front of him with a serious expression. He could sense that this was a very special demi-plane. Although a gap was opened, Gloria didn't enter rashly. A plane crack was just a plane crack, and it was still possible for it to close. So the most important thing for her and the Fallen Witch now was to expand it into a teleportation channel that could be used to travel freely. Only by preparing an escape route would he not have to worry about being trapped inside. A half-plane was a small world. Even the gods could not guarantee that they could ignore any possible dangers. Soren had to use his own divine power to open a dimensional passage when they finished building the portal. It's about to start. In front of Gloria was a very complicated teleportation circle. She looked at the Fallen Witch next to her and then said to Soren, "We will establish the teleportation mark and complete the positioning of the portal. What you need to do is to stabilize the dimensional passage." Soren nodded to show that he understood. Rays of magic appeared, and the mysterious circle on the ground gradually lit up. Then a portal appeared in front of them. Now is the time. Soren's figure floated in the air, and his divine power, which was the embodiment of the power of law, was poured into it. In an instant, a dimensional passage was opened, connecting to the Shadow Plane Wizard Tower in front of them. The half-plane, which was the core of the magic lock, appeared in front of them. It was like seeing a mirror in front of them. On the opposite side of the portal was a vast platform. Soren looked at it and couldn't help but frown and murmured, "This half-plane seems a bit strange." Gloria came to his side and said in a low voice, "Yes. It's a multi-layered half-plane. It looks like a pyramid structure. This can only be done by a very skilled half-plane creator." It seems so. The previous owner of this place was quite amazing. In front of them was a multi-layered half-plane. Just like the Bator Inferno, this was a complete plane, but the Bator Inferno had 9 layers of space. Now Soren saw this half-plane through the portal. It was a very complicated multi-layered pyramid structure. To be able to create a half-plane like this, almost all of them were very powerful spellcasters. This was because they needed to cut the space and they had to master and understand part of the power of law. The structure of the half-plane was very strange. It looked like an inverted pyramid, and one could feel that the space was very big and it had its own plane's laws. The plane's laws. In simple terms, some planes had very high gravity and some had very low gravity. Some had environments that couldn't allow ordinary people to live in, and some had environments that were suitable for all kinds of creatures. This was the law of half-planes. One had to understand the power of the law to be able to create a complete plane. This was a very huge project. Even for a legendary spellcaster who had a lifespan of thousands of years, it was a matter that would take half of his life. Elements, space, gravity, environment, everything needed to be controlled and adjusted by the creator of the half-plane. The energy used to transform a half-plane from a small space to a huge world was simply unimaginable. Even the gods could only draw from the outside world and not rely on their own power. "Let's go in and take a look." Soren turned around and nodded to the 2 people beside him. Gloria quickly cast a protective spell and then activated the portal. There might be a battle. Any half-plane would have a guardian because it was the most precious treasure of a spellcaster. Everything in front of him changed. Soren's figure appeared on a vast platform. The area could be said to be quite large. There were strange stone pillars on the ground that seemed to have some kind of pattern. The structure of the half-plane was very similar to that of the material plane, which meant that its creator had perfected it for a long time. The most obvious feature here was that any action required more effort. The gravity here was close to 1.5 times that of the material plane. The power of the earth elemental plane is very rich. Gloria closed her eyes and murmured, "The energy supply of this layer is mainly maintained by the earth elemental pool. The signs of elemental interference are very obvious." Fallen Witch took a step forward and said, "The gravity is far higher than that of other planes. It should be affected by the earth elemental plane." Planes had their own characteristics. The earth elemental plane was famous for its supergravity. In some places the gravity was more than 10 times. Even the incarnations of the gods couldn't bear it. The half-plane needed the power of the elements to balance. If the balance was wrong, it would lead to various characteristics. Perfect balance was a world like the material plane. If there was a deviation in a certain aspect, just like the half-plane in front of them, the gravity was obviously much stronger because of the interference of the earth elemental plane. A light appeared. In front of Soren and the others, a faint light of teleportation suddenly appeared. Then, a body with a metal upper body and a whirlwind lower body appeared. It looked like a demigod, but it was actually a life created by alchemy. It stared at the 3 people in front of it and didn't show any obvious hostility. It slowly said, "Welcome to the war chess plane. This is the world of the most famous card master of the Arcane Empire, the world of the great arcanist Myadnok Ace. Here, you can challenge the most difficult war chess game. Here you can also obtain unexpected wealth and treasures. I am the war chess commander, Thaling 13. If you are ready to accept the challenge, please stand on the teleportation circle in front of me." Chapter 5:12. Souls were like sowing seeds and they could always harvest some food. Demons did not know how to farm like the devils and obtain souls from other races. Therefore, the cannon fodder of the Abyss army was still from those lower creatures. Dretches were like another kind of kobold. They always liked to run around like a swarm of bees. They had the most powerful leader. They were afraid of strong enemies but liked to bully weak enemies. Finally, under the cruel law of survival of the fittest in the abyss, they gradually grew into cannon fodder that could set foot on the battlefield. As the first layer of the abyss, the plain of 10,000 abyss was a place that was easily affected by the abyss war. The area here was very large. Therefore there were a lot of cannon fodder here. Dretches were more often used as laborers, and occasionally, they would be driven to the battlefield by high-grade demons to consume the enemy's firepower. There were hundreds of millions of dretches in the abyss, but less than 1% of them could advance from dretches to quasits. As for those who could advance to flaming demon, the low-grade form of flame demon, succubus, vrak, and hezru, there was less than 1 in 10,000. There were too many types of demons. In the abyss, only those who had reached the level of 6-armed Marillion were considered to have entered the ranks of high-grade demons. There was very little food on this barren plain. Occasionally some animals could be seen, but they had been demonized. Even the rats had dark red pupils and sharp fangs. The newborn dretch slowly moved forward. The innate memory of the demon was awakening. Just like the bloodline of a sorcerer, demons would gradually master some spell-like abilities. Squeak. A little strange sound came, followed by the appearance of other dretches. The low perception affected its judgment. The newborn dretch stopped and waited for the enemy to appear. 5 dretches appeared in front of it. The one with dark red skin was the leader, and the other 4 were the slaves it had subdued. The dretch had the lowest level of summon demon ability. The one with dark red skin in front of it was a dretch that had completed its evolution. "What is your name?" The dretch leader in front of it seemed to have a cunning expression. It ordered its subordinates to surround the newborn dretch in front of it. The newborn dretch did not have much fear. This was not in line with the nature of a dretch because the enemy had an obvious advantage in numbers. It looked at the dretch leader in front of it and said slowly in a slightly low voice, "Well, demons needed slaves, a lot of slaves. Any slave could be sold to others at a high price as long as they weren't caught as slaves." The bottomless abyss was a very chaotic place. Night witches and Anababas were often seen on this plain. They were very stingy, evil, cruel, and scheming creatures. However, if you could get their promise, then they would most of the time keep it. Night witches and Anababas would provide slaves and servants for various powerful demons in the abyss. Sometimes they would use abyssal worms as currency, but most of the time they would choose dretches. Over the years, the business level of the bottomless abyss had also been increasing. "Sauron, submit to me." The dark red dretch leader looked at the lone dretch and said in the demon language, "As the servant of Fornicat, you are the servant of Fornicat. This way we can obtain more food and power." The dretch leader tried his best to convince the other party. As long as the other party agreed, they could sign a simple contract and sell it to the Anababa. That was how it got its power. Sometimes, the Anababa who traded with it would even say that it should be reincarnated as a devil instead of a demon. "Submit?" A mocking smile appeared on the corner of the newborn's mouth, which made the dretch named Fornicat angry. After several transactions, it had become one of the most powerful dretches in the area, so it decided to teach the newborn a cruel lesson, and then sell it to the Anababa as a slave. The dretches next to it were ready to fight. A lone enemy really stimulated their desire to fight. Roar! The first dretch rushed over. It waved its sharp claws and wanted to cut open the enemy's stomach. But before it could get close, the enemy had already dodged its attack, and then its claws pierced its eyes and cut its throat. Blood gushed out, and the battle seemed to have just begun, but it was already over. A row of data appeared in front of it, extracting target's demon blood. You've gained 1 point of demon power. Current body cannot absorb soul energy. Soul energy conversion. Feedback 10 slaughter EXP to the body. Demon blood activated. A mutation occurred in his own body. Dretch form ability improved. Claws treated as +1 natural magic weapon. Sauron stared at the enemy in front of him. As if a force was integrated into his body, a dark red luster appeared on his sharp claws, which looked like metal. The mutation of a demon was so amazing that he completed a mutation in just a short time. Not good. One of its companions died in the blink of an eye, which made Fornicat feel a little scared. The dretch was originally a very timid creature, so it ordered, "Kill it! Let's go together." 2 dretches roared and rushed up. But their leader, Fornicat, turned around and ran, disappearing in the blink of an eye. It seemed that he was much faster than the other dretches. They were betrayed. When the 2 dretches found out that they had been tricked, they had no chance to escape. Sauron jumped gently and cut their throats with his claws. Although his body size had changed and his attributes had decreased, his combat skills were enough to crush these dretches. He was not interested in wasting too much time in this place. If he wanted to evolve into a more powerful demon form as soon as possible, he must hunt more of his kind. Name Sauron. Race, demon. Form, Dretch, Grade 1, Attributes, Strength 12, Agility 10, Constitution 14, Intelligence 9, Wisdom 11, Charm 11. Alignment, Lawful Evil. Note, other demons will be slightly hostile to your actions. Demonic Power, 3 out of 100. Skills, Sneak 75, Listen 50, Detect 50, Search 20. Ability, Demon Claws, +1 Natural Magic Weapon. Sauron looked at the data page in front of him for a long time before saying to himself, so weak. It's a pity that I can't give divine power and divinity. Otherwise I can directly challenge the lower demons. Next time I create a god's avatar, I must make a body with all attributes 18+. The demon body could not absorb slaughter EXP. Sauron did not know why, but as a demon he could absorb demonic power. The evolution of the Dretch's ability and future mutation were all obtained by the accumulation of demonic blood. Slaughter was the simplest way to evolve. As long as he accumulated enough demonic power, Sauron could change his body into another form. What a strange ability. He looked at his claws with a metallic luster and murmured, the mutation and plasticity of the demonic blood. It's completely different from other creatures' genetic abilities. It's so easy to mutate and even transform into another form. I really don't know what kind of power was used to create the demons. No attributes, no abilities, no skills, no divinity, no divine power. Sauron's body, except for his soul, memories and combat skills, did not inherit any part of his body, not even a trace of power. Therefore he was starting from scratch. But it was also because of this that no demon overlord could discover his secret. This demon body was like a piece of white paper. It was born from the bottomless abyss, and all its power was provided by the bottomless abyss. Only white paper was easy to draw. Sauron felt that his consciousness was much sharper. The demon form could not absorb slaughter EXP, and it seemed that he could not level up like his body. After all, this was just an avatar. But it also had its own advantages. Every time he killed, he did not even need to accumulate enough power to level up. He could feel a slight improvement in his ability. His senses were enhanced. After killing 3 Dretch, he had a +1 natural magic weapon and a slight enhancement of his senses. The demonic blood was really amazing. Chapter 513. The War Chess Plane. When Soren heard the name, he immediately remembered the encounter with the demigod Jin in the Frost Kingdom. At that time, it also mentioned the war chess game. It seemed to be a simulation game that was popular during the Arcane Empire and had a wide influence. The Arcane Empire had a very glorious civilization, and there were some very popular entertainment activities in it. The war chess game seemed to be one of them. However, this didn't seem to be a simple game. Looking at the structure of this plane, it was possible to play this game to death. Do you want to get rid of it? Fallen Witch's voice sounded in the minds of the two. She communicated telepathically, although the Thaling has legendary combat power, it won't be difficult for the 3 of us to deal with it together. Soren glanced at her and shook his head slightly. Wait. After that, a faint light appeared in front of his eyes. This was a special ability after having the appearance of a god. Combined with his previous detection ability, he could roughly analyze some of the enemies. Soren felt a trace of divine power from the Thaling in front of him. This Thaling 13 was definitely not a simple creature. It could be regarded as the manager of this plane. Extracting 1 divine power point. Performing data analysis and simulation on the target. Analysis completed. Obtain some information on the target. Name, Thaling 13, Activated Thaling, Demigod Jin, Virtual Divinity, Race, Alchemy Construct. Level, 20 Activated Construct Thaling Level 5 Demigod Jin, Level 5 Arcanist, Grade 7, Ability, Unknown. Domain Unknown. Alert, alert, alert. Target creature has a virtual divinity in the plane. Divine template activated. Calculating virtual divinity. Target creature has a virtual divinity of lesser divine power. Soren's heart skipped a beat and immediately said, "Don't do it. The target has a virtual divinity. It's the manager of this plane. Here, it can mobilize the power of the entire half-plane to deal with us. I'm afraid our chances of winning are not much." It was actually a demigod. Soren instantly realized what kind of divine power he was familiar with. The thaling in front of him was actually infused with the divinity of an elemental spirit when it was created. He wondered what kind of arcanist would be able to create a thaling of this level. However, it seemed that it had been assimilated by this plane. If such a non-divine unit wanted to have a virtual divine persona, it could only be done by fusing itself with the laws of the entire half-plane. It seemed that its creator used it as an assistant to manage the half-plane. The virtual divine spark was a power that came from the outside world. Many demon lords had virtual divinity, mainly because they had assimilated a part of the power of the abyss. This ability was only effective in the bottomless abyss. Once they left the abyss, they would lose this divinity power. Some powerful spellcasters could also temporarily have a virtual divine spark, but it was only limited to the half-plane they created. If they forcibly fused with the virtual divine spark, they would be imprisoned in the half-plane. It was equivalent to being regarded as a part of the half-plane. Although they had great power, it was difficult for them to leave here. Perhaps the thaling in front of them could not leave this half-plane. Otherwise, with its ability as high as level 30, it would have already entered the wizard tower in the shadow plane. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk a faint red light appeared. Thaling 13 turned its eyes to Soren and said in a calm voice, "Are you ready to challenge me? Challenging me is the most difficult task. After defeating me you will get the plane key, and become the master of this half-plane. But I don't recommend you to do so. When I was created, I was a demigod. Now I am the manager of the elemental pool. Here I have the power of lesser divine power. The success rate of you challenging me is less than 3%. I suggest you to challenge me at normal difficulty. Kingdom of God." When Soren heard Thaling 13's words, the first thought that popped up in his mind was a kingdom of God. Gods were almost invincible in a kingdom of God. This was because unless the kingdom of God was destroyed, the power of the gods was almost endless. The demigod Thaling in front of them was a similar existence. This half-plane was its kingdom of God. It directly controlled the elemental pool of the half-plane. All the power was under its control. As long as the elemental pool continued to operate, its power would be endless. The most effective and simple way to deal with it was to break the half-plane from the outside and destroy it. What should we do? The three people present looked at each other and seemed to be thinking about how to deal with it. They knew almost nothing about this half-plane. But since the original master of this place had fallen, it should be operating according to the way it was set in the past. Perhaps they could find a chance to do so after they understood more about this half-plane. Let me try. Soren glanced at the teleportation circle in front of him and said to the two beside him, "You guys always pay attention to the surroundings. If there is anything unusual, immediately take action." Gloria immediately nodded and said, "Okay." The two legendary witches were ready to fight at any time, as streaks of magical light emerged. Soren looked up at Thaling 13 in front of him. From beginning to end it was very calm. When Soren stepped on the teleportation circle, it said in a cold voice, "The war game begins. The number of challengers is 1. The challenger's strength is at the legendary level. The difficulty of the challenge is automatically set to the highest level. Thaling 13 will take over the command. Activate the tactical simulation map." A strange light appeared. Soren's figure disappeared and directly appeared in the circle formed by the stone pillars. Then he felt the world around him spin. When he opened his eyes, he was already in another world. No, this wasn't his body. Everything was fake. As a god, Soren instantly understood the essence of this space. He saw his own body through the mist in the sky. His body was standing on the magic circle in the center of the stone pillar. The body he had now was just something like a dream, or something more mysterious and incomprehensible to him. How is this possible? Gloria exclaimed and couldn't help but murmur, "What ability is this? Why is this happening?" In their sight, a half-real, half-illusory world was rapidly forming. Its area could be said to be quite vast. It was probably the size of a country. However, in this half-plane it was only a mirror image. Soren's figure was still standing in front of them, but another him seemed to have appeared in a dreamlike country. This is a simulated dream world. The high priestess figure appeared in front of them through the teleportation circle. She said with a serious expression, "This is the ability of the Arcane Empire's tactical simulation. It's a kind of war chess game that can be used to create realistic illusions. It can be used in many ways." After realizing that this half-plane wasn't simple, Soren immediately asked her to come over through telepathy. Although her power as a psionic warlock didn't rely on research like a wizard, from the situation when they fought against the Queen of Spiders, the High Priestess also knew a lot of things about the Arcane Empire. Tactical simulation. The High Priestess had learned this knowledge somewhere before. She thought that this ability was long lost, but she didn't expect to see it again in this half-plane. In front of her was a very strange ability that was very close to a realistic dream. It was more advanced than the one she had encountered before. It was a virtual world that directly extracted the power of the half-plane. Challenge begins. Tactical simulation map creation completed. After completing the challenge, you will gain partial access to the first layer of the war chest plane. Thaling 13's eyes flashed. It said in a cold voice as if it was narrating, "You're an ordinary civilian. You were born in a quiet and peaceful village, but suddenly the peace was broken one day. A fallen wizard passed by here and summoned a terrible demon. He sacrificed the whole village to the demon. The fire burned everything. Your home turned into a sea of fire. There were slaughtered corpses everywhere. You could hear the demon's excited laughter from afar. You're faced with a difficult choice. Stay here to protect your home, or leave this place and stay away from danger. The enemy is a powerful demon and you're just an ordinary person." Along with the calm narration, everything in front of Soren's eyes changed rapidly. There was a raging fire in front of him. He could faintly hear the sound of fighting. There were many slaughtered corpses on the ground, all of them were ordinary civilians. Occasionally he could hear the screams of panic on the other side of the village. Soren stood in front of the gate of the village. He could escape from here if he went forward, but he had to face the demon if he went back. The scene in front of him was a bit similar to when Soren first met the Jinn. At that time, the first test he gave Soren was a multiple-choice question. Now he was facing the same multiple-choice question. Soren still looked the same. It was just that he was wearing simple clothes and had no weapons in his hands. He looked just like an ordinary civilian. The power he had seemed to have disappeared. Soren could not feel the explosive power contained in this body. Everything in the dream was so real that he could raise his hand and touch it. He felt that his arm was not strong. In the flickering flames, a group of dretches appeared. They found Soren standing at the entrance of the village and made strange noises. Then they rushed over like a swarm of bees. Chapter 5:14. There were not many living creatures on the barren plain. A dretch came to the hill and looked at everything in the distance. After standing in place for a moment, it said to itself, "It's really not easy to do two things at once. Even with my god-level ability, sometimes I don't feel used to it. No wonder other gods rarely send their avatars. I don't know how those professions with true mirror image operate." Sauron continued to walk towards the plain. Soon he encountered a new enemy. It was still a group of messy dretches, but they were eating. The food was black rats and a pile of abyss worms. Abyss worms were not only born near blood pools. After the soul fell into the abyss, it would automatically transform into other forms. Many abyssal planes did not have blood pools at all, but there were still abyss worms. The number of these wild abyss worms was not small. They wandered on the barren plain and had a small chance of becoming a dretch. Night witches and hags liked to collect these abyss worms because their alignment was neutral evil, and they could transform into dretch and lesser demons. When low-grade demons lacked servants, they would spend a little power to transform the abyss worms into the lowest level of lesser demons. Demons valued quality more, and the abyss worms were only used as a substitute currency. The strange dretch quickly attracted their attention. The dretches who were eating tore the bodies of the abyss worms, and then some rushed towards Sauron. They did not know why, but they hated this dretch who looked like a demon. Note: lawful evil alignment. Wuxia. Blood splattered out of the wound. In front of Sauron, two dretches quickly fell. His basic attributes were not good enough, so he had to kill more dretches as soon as possible. A series of data prompts appeared in front of his eyes. When Sauron killed all the dretches, a new round of mutation began. Demonic power gathered on his body, and soon a row of data appeared in front of him, extracting target's demonic blood. You've gained 2 demonic power. Current body cannot absorb soul energy. Soul energy conversion. Feedback 30 slaughter EXP. Demonic blood activated. A mutation occurred in his own body. Dretch form ability improved. You have obtained the innate ability, Demon Skin. Damage reduction +5. You've obtained the innate ability Dark Vision, 20 meters. His skin became tough, and his gaze penetrated the darkness. The mutation of demons was so simple. Sauron still could not analyze the potential of the demon bloodline, but he knew that it was a mysterious knowledge even to the gods. Sauron's body turned dark red, and there was a glimmer of light in his eyes. His power has not reached the complete form of a dretch. Sauron glanced at the corpses on the ground. He did not find any weapons or valuable items, so he quickly continued on his way. Part of the soul energy was fed back to the main body, but the proportion was very small. It could only be said that it was better than nothing. They walked like this for a while. Footprints began to appear on the ground, indicating that there were more creatures nearby. Sauron suddenly stopped and hid in the grass. In front of his field of vision, under the darkening sky, a distorted figure appeared before his eyes. The petitioner. The distorted souls wandering in the abyss were different from the petitioners who entered the kingdom of the gods. Many of the petitioners in the abyss were bad guys who did all kinds of evil in their lives. Evil souls fell into the abyss, but they did not turn into abyssal worms. Because many petitioners were professions when they were alive. Perhaps their profession level was not high, but it also made their reincarnation power much stronger. A wandering petitioner. He should be a soul from the material world. Because he was not completely assimilated by the power of the abyss, he now became a creature called a soul, Manes. The spirit in front of him had pale skin, jet-black claws, razor-sharp teeth, loose hair and pale eyes. His face was slightly rotten, and he looked as disgusting as the undead. Many maggots could be seen crawling in the bloated body of the soul. If he survived long enough, the power of the abyss would gradually assimilate him. Eventually, the soul might be promoted to a low-grade demon, although they would completely lose the memory of their previous life. The soul retained a small part of the memory of their previous life. They were the undead demons wandering in the abyss. Soul, the petitioner, grade 2. Challenge rating, level 3 personal level, 6 spell-like abilities. Highest and lowest attributes, 18 and 6, total attribute points, 75 to 85. Special abilities, fire resistance, acid resistance, poison resistance, lightning resistance, acid spit. Challenge difficulty, C+. It was a wandering spirit. The power it provided was enough for Sauron to directly advance into the complete form of a dretch. But Sauron was not in a hurry to launch an attack because he was currently only a low-grade dretch. All his power remained in his body. He only inherited the strong willpower brought by the soul. If he died, he would have to pay a heavy price. It was a gamble to integrate himself into the abyss in this way, and he must not make the slightest mistake. He approached in stealth. Because he did not have the level of a rogue, he could not get the blessing of the shadow. Sauron could only approach in the lowest level of stealth. The smaller size of the dretch provided him with convenience and a natural dodge advantage. After all, the smaller the creature, the harder it was to hit. He gradually approached the soul in front of him and then rushed out in an instant. The sharp claws streaked across the air like a sharp dagger, instantly slicing open the spirit's abdomen. Demon claws were equivalent to +1 natural magic weapon. The howling wind sounded, and the soul counterattacked in an instant. The rotten limbs swung down. It wandered in the wilderness without a weapon. Bang! Sauron's body flew out, but the injury was not serious. The demon skin that he had just acquired had 5 points of damage reduction. In short, even if an ordinary adult with ordinary strength punched him, he would not feel anything. This was the natural ability of demons. Even the lowest dretch could have some of it. With 14 points of dexterity, Sauron still had the advantage of speed. His legendary combat experience made it difficult for him to be hit by the enemy, even if there was a large gap between them. The wounds on the petitioner began to increase. Sauron seized the opportunity and rushed over. He waved his sharp claws like a dagger and pierced into the opponent's eye. The sharp claws penetrated and then directly twisted. Plop. The body of the soul fell to the ground. A data display appeared in front of Sauron's eyes, extracting the power of the abyss. You've gained 10 points of demonic power. The current body cannot absorb soul energy. Soul energy conversion. Feedback 120 Slaughter EXP. Demon bloodline activated. A mutation occurred in his own body. Dretch form ability improved. You've gained the talent ability, Demon Resistance. Fire, strong acid, poison, cold resistance increased by 10 points. Demon bloodline awakened. You've automatically learned the spell-like ability, Summon Demon. Demon bloodline awakened. You've automatically learned the ability, multi-attack. Demon Bloodline Awakened. You've automatically learned the spell-like abilities Fear, once a day, Stinking Cloud, once a day. Demon Bloodline Awakened. You've automatically learned the talent ability, Telepathy. The demon bloodline began to change violently. A mysterious demon tattoo appeared on Sauron's dark red body. This was some kind of incomprehensible power. Many demons had such strange tattoos on their bodies. It further strengthened Sauron's power and made him reach the real strength standard of a Dretch. As the lowest level of demons, Dretches also had many good abilities including Demon Skin, Demon Resistance, Demon Summon, Multi-Attack and a few spell-like abilities. In this case, his challenge rating was raised to 2, and a team of level 2 adventurers was needed to fight against him. Chapter 5:15. Flames danced in front of him. Soren looked at the Dretches in front of him and ran in another direction without hesitation. Without strength, weapons and equipment he was just an ordinary person. It would be difficult for him to even deal with one Dretch, let alone a large group of them. Because of some reasons that he could not tell others, he now had a fairly clear understanding of the strength of the Dretches. With his current civilian body, he probably could not even withstand the Dretch's stinking cloud. Constitution is only about 10. Strength is also about 10. Dexterity is slightly higher, but it should not exceed 14. After running a few steps, Soren had a rough estimate of his attributes. He was at the level of an ordinary person. Not to mention dealing with these Dretches, he might not even be able to defeat a warrior who had just advanced. As for escaping from the village, Soren basically ruled it out. First of all, he was quite reluctant to run away without fighting. Secondly, it was already dark. Looking at the road, he knew that this village was not near the town. It was a dense forest outside. With his current physical fitness, even if he did not encounter any monsters outside, a beast could kill him. He didn't have dark vision, so he couldn't see anything in the pitch black outside. Weapon. I must find a weapon first. It was impossible to kill a Dretch with just his fists. Soren would probably be cut open if he touched its sharp claws. He had the best fighting skills, but without a weapon, it was impossible to kill a Dretch. There were flames everywhere in front of him. The battle on the other side of the village was still going on, but the sound of resistance had weakened a lot. The area of the village was not small, and it was estimated that there were hundreds of people living in it. Many houses were already on fire. Soren could not rush in to find a weapon, and he might be blocked by the Dretches chasing after him. There must be a blacksmith in such a village. Soren quickly looked around and said to himself, the primitive environment determines that they need to be self-sufficient, and blacksmiths are the key to maintaining their daily lives. The scenery around him quickly passed by. After sprinting for 100 or 200 meters, Soren felt tired, but he finally saw the furnace of the blacksmith. Sure enough, this remote village still needed a blacksmith. Soren rushed into the blacksmith, but the next moment he was a little dumbfounded. Kitchen knife, sickle, hoe. There was no long sword, no curved sword. The sharpest weapon Soren could find was a freshly forged kitchen knife. Other than that, the blacksmith's shop had a sickle and a newly assembled hoe. He could not even find a hammer. He did not know if it was taken by the blacksmith or not. It seemed that Soren still had high expectations for the blacksmith shop in such a village. A blacksmith who could forge weapons would not be in such a remote village. At first glance, the blacksmiths here were the kind of blacksmiths that satisfied the needs of ordinary villagers. When they were free, they would make 2 kitchen knives and sickles for them. I don't care so much. Soren gritted his teeth, picked up the new kitchen knife, and slashed at the Dretch in front of him. I can't run anymore. My stamina is not as good as these demons. The more I run, the more I can't hold on. Clang. The kitchen knife collided with the Dretch's claws. Then Soren was a little dumbfounded because there was a gap on the kitchen knife. Damn. At this moment, even Soren couldn't help it. He used to have a decent weapon, even a dagger would be fine. But why was there a gap on the kitchen knife? Poochie. Blood splattered. Even with a kitchen knife, Soren still cut open the stomach of the Dretch in front of him. If it weren't for the fact that his weapon was too weak and his strength was only at the standard of an ordinary person, he could probably kill the Dretch in front of him. Whoosh! The blood stimulated the demon's desire to attack. A swarm of Dretches rushed over and drowned Soren in the crowd. Damn it! Soren suddenly opened his eyes. With a burst of terrible pressure, invisible waves of air raged out. He gently stomped his feet, and the ground within a radius of 20 meters around him completely cracked. With a loud bang, the 20-meter-high stone pillars collapsed directly. The light on the magic circle gradually dissipated. With just a gentle stomp, Soren even destroyed the magic circle under his feet. Thaling 13 frowned slightly and said in a cold voice, "Challenge failed. Please don't destroy everything here. Otherwise I will treat you as an enemy." It gently waved its hand and the cracked ground gradually closed. The collapsed stone pillars rose again, and the magic circle under Soren's feet reappeared. Sure enough, everything here was under its control. Otherwise, it would not be able to mobilize the power of the half-plane at will. Soren was a little tired. But there seemed to be a fire in his heart. He said in a deep voice, "One more time. I just wasted a little bit of time because I just entered." It was simply unforgivable that he died in the hands of a dretch. As long as he had a sword, even if it was an inferior long sword, Soren had more than 50% confidence that he could kill these dretches one by one. But this woman only had a kitchen knife. What was the point of fighting? Soren was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. A god died in the hands of a group of dretches. He wanted to hang the person who designed this battle chess challenge. Thaling 13's expression was still calm and it said slowly, "Challenge failed. Your spirit has entered a state of weakness. Forcibly entering will cause your spirit to weaken. Please wait for 48 hours before you challenge again." But the three ladies next to you can try to challenge. The light of teleportation appeared. Soren's figure returned to the original place. There seemed to be no change, but his spirit was very tired. Incredible ability. Even Sauron, who had the power of law as a god, could not figure out what means the original creator of this place had used. Unless they cracked the secret of this half-bit wall, it would be difficult for them to figure out the key. Should we try to? Gloria's expression seemed to be a little eager to try. As a spellcaster, she was very interested in this mysterious means, especially since it belonged to the mysterious knowledge of the arcane kingdom. She wanted to experience what it was for herself. The high priestess shook her head slightly and said, "You two can try. It's not suitable for me to enter this place now." She was still injured. If she entered and failed the challenge, the high priestess' injuries would be much more serious. The light of two spells appeared. Gloria, who was eager to try, and Fallen Witch, who was also curious about the knowledge of the arcane empire, entered the half-plane. Everything in front of them changed again. It was the same world that Soren experienced, but the two witches were the main characters. About 5 minutes later, Gloria's figure appeared on the magic circle. Her expression was indescribably gloomy. She silently bit her lips and came to Soren's side. It was rare for her to use a voice like a little girl who was wronged. "I don't have any spells at all." The result was self-evident. About 10 minutes later, Fallen Witch's figure also appeared on the magic circle. She came to Soren with a pale face and said in a low voice, "There's no way out from the outside. There's a wizard guarding outside. It's a dead end." Obviously. Soren and Gloria both chose to stay in the village, and Fallen Witch did not hesitate to choose to leave. It seemed that the result was the same. Thaling 13's expression was still very calm. He said in a cold voice, "Challenge failed. Everyone please go back. You're welcome to come again after you've recovered. What you've just experienced is only the first level of the War Chest Challenge. After the challenge, I'll open the first level of the half-plane to you. Of course. If you have any dissatisfaction with this challenge, you can also choose to challenge me directly. If you defeat me, you'll get the control of the half-plane." Thaling 13 gently waved his hand. Along with the fluctuation of the elemental power, a huge elemental pool could be faintly felt. Then, an elder of the earth element, an elder of the fire element, an elder of the wind element, and an elder of the water element appeared behind him. The surrounding stone statues also seemed to move and turned into tall stone statues. At this time, Thaling 13's expression was still very calm, but for some reason, it was very annoying. Chapter 5:16. Under the quiet night sky. After leaving the wizard tower in the shadow plane, Soren could not help but let out a long sigh. Gloria's figure came to his side. The loose wizard robe could not cover her proud curves. On the contrary, the complex and mysterious runes added a touch of mystery and elegance to her. Her silver-white hair fluttered in the night wind, and her white neck was like a white jade under the moonlight. Gloria stood side by side with Soren and gently reached out her hand to hold Soren's palm. She held it tightly and felt the other party's temperature. Under the moonlight, the two people's reflections overlapped. Fallen, which stood not far away and watched silently. Her expression seemed to be a little complicated. After a long time she slowly turned around and left. Gloria turned her head and looked at Soren's side face. She leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "What do we do now?" Soren took a deep breath, looked at the dim starry sky and murmured, "Now we can only take one step at a time. If it doesn't work, we can only accumulate strength to defeat the demigod Thaling." The challenge in the war chess plane was simply too difficult. The projection did not inherit the power of the real body at all. If an ordinary person fought against a powerful demon, the chance of winning was probably less than 1 in 1,000. He really wanted to hang up the person who designed the challenge and beat him up. At present, he could only wait for the next challenge opportunity. Soren still made a mistake today. He hesitated for 3 seconds after entering the war chess challenge. If he could find a place to hide in these 3 seconds and avoid the sight of the group of dretches, then he could get more chances. For a long time, Soren was used to planning before acting. If he had more than 50% confidence, then he would decide to make a move. In the war chess world he might not even have 10% confidence. He had never encountered this kind of battle before. This was also a kind of training for him. Because sometimes he could not have more than 50% chance of winning every battle. Perhaps he could take this opportunity to train himself. Fighting against a much stronger enemy required not only strength, but also wisdom and courage. Actually, now that he had calmed down, Soren's train of thought seemed to have many directions. For example, he could ask for help from others. It was obvious that there were others who were fighting against the demons. In a village with hundreds of people, it was possible for there to be low-level priests. In order to defend against wild beasts, there must be professionals who retired. Even from an evil point of view, it was not impossible to communicate with the enemy. Dretch may not have much wisdom, but it was possible to communicate with the evil wizard in the dark or summon demons. However, this required a high level of negotiation ability, acting ability, and top-notch deception ability. Soren pondered for a moment. Fighting seemed to be the most suitable thing for him. The night passed quickly. The expansion of the city of Mordor had been completed by 1/5. The slaves from Treasure Island had sped up the progress a lot. Many of the first batch of slaves had gained new identities. They had become Soren's tenants. They worked for Soren and farmed for Soren. Although they had to pay heavy taxes after a year, these tenants could still survive and save a little property. The biggest difference in the city of Mordor was that everyone had the opportunity to climb up. But these opportunities were only for those who were willing to work hard and sweat. The military parade was still in preparation, and the drows were busy training them. It seemed that there was a split among the drows. Some of the drows had completely moved to the city of Mordor, while the other part remained in their original place. What a group of stubborn females. Soren did not pay much attention to them now. If these female drows were not willing to submit to him, then they would be left to fend for themselves. In fact, there was a very obvious feminist ideology in this world. The two most obvious groups were the drows and the Amazons. The deep-rooted ideology that had been passed down for thousands of years made them extremely resistant to submitting to men. If it weren't for the fact that he had too many things to do, sometimes Soren really wanted to teach them a lesson. Everything in the city of Mordor was on the right track. With the protection of the gods, all the residents felt very relieved. The powerful force of the city of Mordor was the guarantee that brought them peace. Because peace was never bragged. Peace was fought with force and war. As a new god, Soren still had a lot to learn. Although divine power was a powerful force, his own strength was still very important. Soren began to learn complex arcane knowledge. He was going to improve his arcanist level during this period of time. It would be best if he could master 1 or 2 legendary spells. With the ability of the gods, he learned very quickly. When he mastered the divine ability of arcane proficiency, in the future, Soren's ability would improve even faster. In the blink of an eye, another day had passed. On this day, Soren was going to make a bold attempt, that was, to take this opportunity to travel between planes. Whether as a god or a legendary figure, Soren had the qualification to travel between planes. However, because he could not leave the city of Mordor for the time being, Soren chose to travel by astral world tour, projecting himself into the astral plane to see how mysterious this multiverse was. Everything had been prepared. After night fell, Soren came to the center of the array. With a little divine power, he activated the astral projection array. Divine power was so useful. No wonder many gods paid more attention to improving their level. As the embodiment of the power of the law, divine power could be transformed in almost any aspect. Before his divine power was exhausted, he didn't even need to use the spell slots. A faint light of magic emerged. With a slight sense of dizziness, Soren's figure appeared in the endless void. The bright galaxy appeared in front of him, and in front of him was a huge material plane. Every time he saw the complete appearance of the material plane, it was so shocking. This was a vast and boundless plane. Its outer layer was the plane barrier. At the bottom of the material plane, there was a passage connecting the 4 major elemental planes. He didn't know who created the material world, but he was sure that he definitely had a very strong power. Soren walked in the void. Because he was only a projection here, he could move easily with his mind because his body was only a spiritual body. Below the endless void was a mysterious dark matter. It was like a vortex formed in the void, rotating at an unimaginable speed. Occasionally, mysterious silver-white dust could be seen, but Soren didn't know what it was. There were too many secrets in the astral plane. It was connected to all the planes. The material plane, the shadow plane, the spiritual world, the underworld, the upper plane, the lower plane, the elemental plane, countless half-planes, and so on. Occasionally. Here he could see the huge ancient god's body as well as the terrible gods who were exiled. Everything the gods saw was so wonderful. Soren walked under the stars of the multiverse, and he felt more and more insignificant. All of a sudden, he seemed to see something and couldn't help but tremble. A planet? He definitely didn't see it wrong. A planet flew past his sight and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Soren seemed to have seen many planes. This was the first time he saw a structure similar to a planet. He couldn't help but be very surprised. From the god's point of view, it wasn't impossible to shape a plane into the shape of a planet. It was just that it required more energy, more power, and more time. According to his memory of Earth, 71% of the surface was covered by the ocean, which represented the power of the water element. The basic structure of the whole planet was the Earth, which represented the power of the earth element. The inner core of Earth was magma, which represented the power of the fire element. The last thing that covered the whole planet and protected it was the atmosphere, which represented the power of the air element. Water, fire, earth, and air. This was the basic material of the multiverse. Almost all the planes were supported by the power of the elements. As for where the elements were born, it was a mystery that even the gods didn't know. Soren could no longer see the traces of the planet, but he knew that it really existed. He just couldn't be sure if it belonged to the material plane or some other kind of plane. Without a doubt, its surface was huge and it had existed for a long time. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.